This man is a criminal genius with an exceptionally high IQ. He looks down on low-level crooks who rob banks with brute force. Now, let's see how he quietly steals $1 million all by himself. Neil walks into the bank and tells the receptionist he's the new employee reporting for duty. The receptionist is irritated. No one told her about any new hire. She immediately gets up to check the internal message box. What she doesn't know is that 10 minutes earlier, Neil had disguised himself as a janitor, sneaked into the basement, and cut the pneumatic message tube. Then, he slipped in a fake employment notice. Next, Neil takes the elevator, removes his janitor uniform, and reveals a crisp suit underneath, ready for his first day. When the receptionist gets the fake hiring notice, she verifies it and cheerfully leads Neil to the secure area. Of course, Neil's fake ID card doesn't work. The receptionist uses her own to open the door for him. Neil pretends to notice a few hairs on her jacket, flirts casually to lower her guard, then swiftly steals her access card. With that, he walks straight to the main vault. The receptionist doesn't have clearance to enter, but Neil's friend Mozzie had already cracked the vault's code. Without triggering a single alarm, Neil glides through the double security doors. Next comes the money. The bank still uses outdated anti-theft bags, which are no match for Neil's sharp eye. Within minutes, he spots the ones with GPS trackers and tosses them aside, then fills another bag with a cool $1 million in cash. Neil strolls out of the vault as if he's just taking a walk. The entire heist takes only 3 minutes, and no one in the bank notices a thing. But at the main entrance, FBI agent Peter Burke is already waiting. Turns out, this was just a bank security test. Watching Neil pull off the stunt so effortlessly, Peter says, "Time to show the bank manager what real security looks like." In the previous season, Neil's girlfriend was killed in an explosion. While he narrowly survived, Peter was reinstated and visited Neil in prison, deciding to release him again to serve as his consultant. The mastermind behind it all, someone tied to the FBI's own director, has vanished without a trace. No one knows who wanted Neil and his girlfriend dead. Peter promises Neil that he'll find the one responsible, and so the dynamic duo teams up once again. Their first assignment is to test the security of local banks. When Neil succeeds flawlessly, the bank managers are left speechless. It turns out all 5 banks had received a calling card from a notorious architect thief who had successfully broken into top security banks across the country. He announced he'd target 5 banks in New York next. The arrogant managers believed their systems were foolproof, so Peter asked Neil to simulate a heist to prove them wrong. Neil actually admires the architect. Each of his heists is so ingenious it commands respect, but this time, they're on opposite sides. Neil's task is to help Peter catch him. They start by analyzing the card and notice a peculiar way the letter A is written. It matches the handwriting style of a famous author, suggesting the thief is an obsessed fan. Their investigation leads them to a wealthy businessman named Keller, a die-hard fan who even bought the author's original manuscripts. Strangely, Keller is always in the same city whenever a bank robbery occurs. However, Keller owns several major companies, so his presence in those cities could be business-related. His schedule, logged in his secretary's phone, seems to prove that his appearances were merely coincidences. Peter questioned Keller for a while but found no valuable leads. It seemed Keller wasn't suspicious at all, but Neil thought otherwise. Neil believed that once people reached a certain level of success, they often sought new thrills. Maybe Keller was simply bored, robbing banks just to mock the police and entertain himself. Neil decided to approach Keller's secretary. Using his charm and charisma, he made her fall for him instantly, then discreetly stole her phone and handed it off to his friend Mozzie. Mozzie quickly cloned all the data from her phone. Based on what they found, Keller was likely to hit the First Union Bank in New York the next day. Peter immediately ordered the SWAT team to stake out around the bank. Sure enough, the next day at noon, the bank alarm blared. However, the security cameras caught no sign of any suspect. The robber must have found a way to bypass them and enter the vault unseen. To be safe, the SWAT team swept through the entire building but found nothing unusual, only a ringing alarm clock. Someone had triggered the alarm on purpose just to mess with them. The SWAT leader was furious, accusing Peter of wasting everyone's time. Just then, Keller showed up, mocking him. He had known Neil cloned his secretary's phone and had staged the prank himself. The FBI now strongly suspected Keller was the architect thief, but they had no proof and no clue how he pulled off his heists. While Peter was home and Neil was trying to think of a plan, one of Peter's agents called. Peter turned on the TV and froze. The whole city was in chaos. A total of 36 banks had triggered their alarms. Every police unit in the city was being mobilized. Clearly, it was a massive diversion. Knowing Keller's arrogance, he'd definitely target one of the 5 banks that received his calling card. Sure enough, at one of those banks, as the female manager was asking customers to leave before closing, a group of robbers disguised as clients walked in. They quickly subdued the guards, put on masks, and took the manager hostage. Once the doors were locked, the real heist began. Peter and Neil rushed out planning to check each bank one by one. Peter told his team to coordinate with SWAT and wait for his call. Once they confirmed which bank it was, they raced over. The front doors were sealed shut, but Neil spotted another way in. He pulled Peter up to the rooftop, opened the emergency hatch, and slipped inside from above. Inside, the robbers were forcing the manager to open the vault. Peter had only a handgun. Fighting head-on would be suicide. They decided to stall for time until SWAT arrived. The robbers got into the vault and started stuffing cash into suitcases. Neil still had the access card he stole from the receptionist earlier, allowing him and Peter to enter the area quietly. Sirens blared outside. SWAT had arrived. Peter rescued the manager, but the robbers had already finished loading the money and were escaping as planned. Neil tried to chase them, but as he reached the exit, the robbers had already removed their masks and melted into the bustling crowd. Peter and Neil returned to FBI headquarters, exhausted, only to find Keller waiting. He mocked Peter for accusing him wrongly and accused Neil of violating privacy laws by cloning his secretary's phone. Keller announced he'd have his lawyer press charges and taunted that unless the FBI actually lost a few million, they'd never get him. Neil always believed no plan was perfect. There was always a flaw somewhere. The problem was they couldn't find Keller's. Just then, one of Peter's agents sent over the loss report, a total of $8.2 million stolen. That figure sparked something in Neil's mind. He immediately reviewed the security footage. 4 robbers, carrying 8 suitcases. Neil knew those suitcases well, their dimensions, their capacity. After calculating, he realized 8 suitcases could only hold about $6.5 million. That meant over $1 million was still unaccounted for. Someone inside the bank must have taken a cut. The next morning, once the bank opened, Peter and Neil returned. The same female manager greeted them. When Peter insisted on inspecting the vault, she looked puzzled but led them there anyway. Peter asked her to open safety deposit box number 213. They discovered the box owner had died long ago, and he was actually the manager's uncle. It seemed she had impersonated him to open it. She tried to stay calm and agreed to let them open it. Sure enough, inside was over $1 million, proof she was the insider. Suddenly, the manager pulled out a gun, holding them at gunpoint, demanding the money and her release. Thinking fast, Neil grabbed 2 dye-stained bundles of cash and pretended to argue with Peter to distract her. The moment she looked away, he disarmed her in one swift move. The next step was to arrest Keller. He was leisurely playing golf when Peter and his team arrived. The manager had confessed everything, naming Keller as the mastermind. They finally caught the infamous architect thief. After the case, Agent Diana showcased her incredible adaptability. She went undercover as a glamorous woman at an elite escort party. Even Peter and Neil were stunned. Who knew the usually stern Diana could look that stunning? The FBI's next mission was to expose a hypocritical senator. He'd become so popular lately that even Neil's friend Mozzie was an avid fan. With his polished manners and eloquence, the senator seemed trustworthy. No one suspected he was merely a puppet controlled by criminals. One of the senator's aides came forward to the FBI. She had once been a devoted supporter, but after working closely with him, she discovered his campaign funds were shady, likely sourced from drug lords and organized crime. Shockingly, the people's beloved senator was actually the spokesperson for criminals. He was even planning to run for governor. If he won, the entire state would fall into the hands of drug traffickers. The aide revealed that the senator kept a secret ledger recording illegal transactions, but only he and his inner circle had access to it, making it nearly impossible to obtain proof. Peter's investigation showed that the senator once had an FBI mole, but that person had retired, and now he was searching for a new one. With his high IQ, charm, and quick adaptability, Neil was the perfect candidate to go undercover. Peter decided to insert him into the senator's circle. Together, they staged a plan. Peter played the bad guy, approaching the senator and claiming he wanted to make a name for himself by bringing him down. Peter reminded him that 5 years ago he had been involved in an illegal loan case. Though he was cleared, Peter claimed he didn't buy it and vowed to reopen the case. If he found anything incriminating, he'd expose the senator publicly and use it to boost his own career. The senator pretended not to care, but as soon as Peter left, he lost his temper and gathered his advisors to discuss countermeasures. As expected, he pressured Peter's superiors to fire him. Fortunately, the FBI director personally defended Peter. That forced the senator to look for a new mole inside the bureau. Neil caught wind of it and quickly came up with a plan. The senator arranged interviews with several FBI agents, one of whom was Neil under a false identity. To ensure his cover held, Diana, transferred from the intelligence division, crafted him a flawless background, down to fake high school records. On interview day, Neil, under the alias Cooper, met the senator and his staff. Casually, he planted a listening device inside a condiment holder on the table. When one aide mentioned taking down Agent Peter, Neil's mind sparked with a new idea. He'd approach the situation from a different angle. In fact, that very morning while reading the paper, Neil had noticed an article about a group of businessmen building a stadium in a residential area, facing strong local opposition. What the people wanted was a free public park, not a noisy stadium that charged admission, but the greedy corporations ignored them, sparking public outrage. Neil immediately spotted an opportunity. He advised the senator to publicly support the people's demand for a park and stand up to the corporations. This would craft an image of a people's champion who defies big business. Then, when Peter reopened the old case, even if the senator was guilty, the public would believe it was just corporate propaganda to smear him. On the contrary, it would boost his popularity, rendering Peter's investigation powerless. Neil's advice delighted the senator. He immediately told his aide to cancel all other meetings and hire Neil for his team, no matter the cost. After that, Peter returned home. Thanks to Neil's connections, his wife had arranged an art exhibit for a renowned artist. Peter used the chance to invite Diana over. Neil's girlfriend, Kate, had died in a plane explosion. Fearing his emotions might cloud his judgment, Peter and Diana kept it from him and began investigating the culprit themselves. However, while they were working secretly, someone outside managed to take photos of them. Meanwhile, Neil officially accepted the senator's offer to act as his mole inside the FBI. That morning, when he arrived to report, the senator hadn't shown up yet. The senator's aide, secretly an FBI informant, kept watch while Neil took the chance to search the senator's office for evidence linking him to organized crime and drug trafficking. But before he could find anything, the senator suddenly arrived. The aide quickly came up with an excuse to stall him. Neil barely had time to notice a suspicious matchbox. He snapped a photo and sent it to Peter, spotting some letters printed on it. Then, he quietly put it back, slipped out a side door, and pretended he'd been waiting there all along. He greeted the senator cheerfully, joking that they should discuss salary first. The senator smiled and told him to meet a man named Vincent Adler, someone who'd make sure he's satisfied with the pay. Peter quickly traced the logo on the matchbox. It belonged to an exclusive escort service owned by none other than Vincent Adler. The two immediately realized Adler was likely the middleman connecting the senator and the drug syndicate. Peter prepared to hack into the company's private network, suspecting the word on the matchbox was the senator's login password. Meanwhile, the senator held a press conference. Reporters asked about the sports club project, and everything unfolded exactly as Neil had predicted. Neil advised him to keep up his anti-corporate, for the people act. The senator's polished response earned widespread admiration. After the meeting, the senator and his right-hand man kept Neil behind. They feared that even though the old scandal had been covered up, Peter might still strike again. The aide showed Neil photos of Peter and Diana meeting late at night, planning to use them to fabricate an affair and ruin Peter's career. Quick thinking, Neil said he'd once heard Peter brag about knowing a hot girl when he first joined the FBI, probably the same woman in the photo. He advised them not to leak it yet, since the FBI director would surely defend Peter. Instead, they should bribe the girl and use her to get closer to him, extracting more secrets before destroying him completely. Both men agreed it was a smart idea and told Neil to find the girl. They then tasked Vincent Adler with handling the arrangements. Neil immediately told Peter everything. Upon hearing that Neil had claimed Diana was a call girl, they decided to have her actually play that role to get close to Adler. Surprisingly, Diana didn't object at all. She handled the undercover role like a true professional. Meanwhile, Mozzie enthusiastically kept writing articles praising the senator, campaigning for him, completely unaware his idol was a fraud. Dressed elegantly and posing as a stunning escort, Diana entered Adler's high-end agency. The clients were all wealthy elites, while the FBI team monitored everything from a surveillance van nearby. Vincent Adler struck up a conversation with Diana, bluntly saying he could pay her handsomely if she helped expose Peter's dirty secrets. But to prove herself, Adler ordered her to pick any man and close a deal. If she could make $10,000 in 3 hours, she'd pass the interview. Diana had no choice but to accept. While the FBI team watched in shock, none of them had expected Adler to pull such a stunt. At that moment, Peter realized Neil had slipped out of the surveillance van without anyone noticing. Sure enough, just as a man was eyeing Diana lustfully, Neil appeared posing as her client to stop him. The mission now was to somehow come up with $10,000 in 3 hours. Unfortunately, none of the agents had that kind of cash. Meanwhile, the senator called Neil, telling him to contact Adler about his salary. Thankfully, it was just a phone call. Knowing Peter's team couldn't raise the money, Neil subtly whispered into the wire, suggesting Peter seek help from his old partner. Sure enough, Peter soon turned to Mozzie, who couldn't hide his smug satisfaction. Before Neil went to prison, he had entrusted Mozzie with a massive savings stash, so 10 grand was nothing. Meanwhile, Neil and Diana continued their act. Neil pretended to be enchanted by her, and the two moved into a VIP room upstairs. All they had to do was kill time for 3 hours until Peter got the money. Mozzie had hidden the cash well. After some detours, Peter reached the stash, but Mozzie made him wait outside. Moments later, he emerged holding $10,000 in hand. Peter couldn't help but wonder just how much money Neil had stashed away before going to prison. By the time Peter returned to the van, it was nearly deadline. They needed to record the serial numbers. If the senator later used this money for his campaign, it would be undeniable proof of guilt. While waiting, Neil and Diana killed time by sharing embarrassing stories from their pasts. Just as the tension eased, there was a knock at the door. They hastily pretended to be intimate, only to find it was Mozzie, posing as a waiter delivering the cash. When the time came, Neil and Diana went downstairs. Diana handed Adler the $10,000, and he smiled, telling her to expect his call. Thanks to Neil's strategy, the senator handled the press perfectly, announcing his support for building the park, and the public cheered him on. Everyone now believed his past scandal was a corporate smear, sending his approval ratings soaring. The campaign staff showered Neil with praise. Even the arrogant aide couldn't stop complimenting him. The senator, now riding high, was ready to run for governor. To prevent any slip-ups, his aide decided to strike first by taking Peter down. He ordered Vincent Adler to capture the call girl, interrogate her for intel, and then move against Peter. Neil panicked upon learning Diana was in danger and immediately alerted Peter. By then, Diana was already in Adler's office. Seeing a pistol on his leg, she knew trouble was coming. Adler threatened her, demanding details about Peter, but Diana countered by revealing her true identity. She was an FBI agent. Adler froze, pointing his gun at her, but he had underestimated her combat skills. By the time Peter's team stormed in, Diana already had Adler pinned beneath her heel. Adler confessed he was the middleman linking the senator and the drug cartel. Peter arrested the aide and seized both the ledger and the campaign money. With both hard evidence and witnesses, the case was airtight. The senator tried to play innocent until Neil stepped forward, revealing himself as an undercover FBI informant. The senator was arrested on the spot. Neil, the brilliant criminal mastermind of his era, was later featured in university textbooks as a case study in criminal genius. When he found out, he just grinned with pride, the FBI's most honorable consultant indeed. That morning, every major newspaper headline screamed the same news: a masterpiece had vanished from the gallery. Neil immediately insisted it wasn't him. According to the gallery manager, the thief was clearly a professional. He struck while the security tapes were being changed and ripped the painting from its frame in a crude but efficient way. Neil knew this method all too well. He could practically retrace the thief's every move. However, the gallery's decision to publicize the theft worried Peter. It would only alert the thief and make him harder to catch. But then, the manager revealed that the theft had never been made public. That raised both Peter's and Neil's suspicions. It seemed the thief himself had leaked the story to stir up interest from black market buyers and make the painting easier to sell. Peter immediately ordered his team to contact Interpol and European agencies for leads, while Neil was tasked to tap into his underworld connections. Naturally, Neil turned to his old partner Mozzie, the man who knew every corner of the underground. Less than an hour later, Mozzie arrived stealthily at the meeting spot. They even used a silly password to identify each other, which made Neil both amused and exasperated. As Neil stepped behind a statue, the person waiting turned out to be Alex, his old partner in crime who had once risked her life alongside him. The last time they'd met was during the music box heist. Neil thought he'd never see her again, but after hearing about his girlfriend's death, Alex had returned out of concern. Alex was a broker dealing high-value art on the black market. She told Neil the stolen painting had already been sold in Dubai. She seemed to have more to say but abruptly sent Neil away, asking to speak with Mozzie alone. Just then, Peter called, asking Neil to return. He'd found that the painting had been sold to a wealthy collector in Budapest. Meanwhile, Diana and Jones reported another copy surfacing in London. Neil immediately realized all three paintings were fakes. Once the theft became public, customs would tighten security, but if the thief had shipped out the fakes before the news broke and then leaked the story himself, it would be the perfect scheme. The forgeries would circulate freely while the real painting remained in New York. This method was Neil's old trademark, so he suspected it was a copycat crime. The FBI seized all three paintings for examination. Neil analyzed the brushwork, color tones, and lighting, immersing himself in the art to find clues. Soon, he concluded they were painted by the same hand and not copied from photos, but from the original piece itself. Neil deduced that the light source in the paintings matched natural sunlight from a skylight. The manager confirmed the original had only ever been displayed under that skylight once. Peter immediately ordered a check of the guest log from that day. A student from East University caught their attention. When they visited the campus, they learned the student had painted 7 replicas after receiving an email offer promising good payment. The deal was conducted entirely online, so he had no idea he was committing a crime. Fortunately, he was cautious. After meeting the man in person, he'd sketched his face from memory. That evening, when Neil returned home, Alex was still there. She explained that after they delivered the music box to Vincent Adler, a high-ranking FBI associate, he vanished, along with the artifact. Since then, a mysterious organization backing Adler had placed a bounty on Neil and Alex to recover the box. Neither of them knew that Peter had secretly taken the box earlier from Adler's garage. Alex wanted to return the Kerrang coin she still had and had contacted a dealer through Mozzie as a go-between. But the dealer, knowing a bounty was on Alex's head, planned to betray her for the reward. Neil reassured her, saying her problems were now his own, and he would never let anything happen to her. Based on the sketch drawn by the student, Diana discovered the person who hired him, a female student from the same university, majoring in criminal psychology. Given how complex and meticulous the forgeries were, she clearly couldn't have done it alone. There had to be more people involved. As Diana continued her investigation, Neil discovered that the university's textbooks actually had chapters dedicated to him. Learning that he'd been immortalized in an academic textbook made Neil grin with pride. Seeing his masterful criminal techniques praised in print, he almost wanted to brag to the entire FBI. So, Neil snuck into a lecture where Professor Tarek was analyzing the diamond forgery case he himself had pulled off. Neil immediately pointed out an error in the analysis. At first, Tarek was irritated until he realized who it was, Neil Caffrey. He immediately invited him to the podium. A legendary criminal teaching in person. Within minutes, the students were thrilled, firing off question after question. Neil noticed the suspect girl among the students. When someone asked why he'd been caught, Neil, saving face, joked that he'd turned himself in because he was tired of the game. After class, Neil struck up a conversation, casually mentioning that the art thief had used the same technique he once did, preparing forgeries in advance. He told Tarek he'd been out of the game too long and wanted back in, asking if Tarek could bring him along on a job. Tarek feigned ignorance, but Neil's sharp instincts told him the professor was the real mastermind, using his students to test his theories in real life. Neil returned to the FBI and played the classroom recording for Peter. Peter fumed when he heard Neil claim he'd turned himself in, since he knew damn well he'd trapped him back then. Peter dug deeper and found Tarek connected to several previous forgery cases. With the FBI and Interpol now involved, Tarek would likely lay low. They needed a way to make him expose himself. Neil figured the real painting was still with Tarek, and the trick was to make him destroy the evidence himself. Some of Tariq's students, including the suspect girl, were hanging out at a bar. Neil approached them casually. They didn't see him as a threat. In fact, they were intrigued. Neil was almost certain they were Tariq's accomplices. He called Alex, asking her to show up and pose as an art dealer to get their attention. Alex, a well-known broker in the black market, immediately caught the students' attention, especially Tarek, who recognized her name. Neil then came up with a brilliant plan to both protect Alex from being betrayed and bring down Tariq's crew at the same time. He didn't tell the FBI the full truth. Instead, he said a thief was planning to steal a suitcase containing a rare Kerrang coin on Sunday. According to his plan, Peter's team would intercept the suitcase, then Jones, disguised as the thief, would carry it through the city to lure Tariq's students into action. To sell the setup, Neil returned to campus, chatting casually with Tariq's group when Alex stormed in and staged an argument with him. She shouted that she'd already found a buyer, but Neil had gone soft and refused to finish the job. The entire group took notice. Before leaving, Alex slapped Neil across the face, sealing the act. Neil then let slip that another thief was after the suitcase, one he himself had planned to steal before realizing it was too risky alone. That single remark hooked the students completely. By the weekend, Neil had convinced them to make their move. The only question was whether Tarek himself would show up. On Sunday, when the thief appeared with the suitcase, Peter's team immediately surrounded him and brought him to the surveillance van. The man claimed he'd simply found it. That was fine, it was all part of the plan. Jones, disguised as the thief, continued walking down the street with the gold coin case, drawing Tarek and his students right into the trap. Before long, Tariq's students had put their plan into motion. One of them accidentally bumped into Jones, and while he bent down to pick up his things, another quietly swapped out the suitcase with the gold coins. Believing they'd succeeded, the students walked away smugly, right as Neil appeared to finalize his setup. He stashed the real suitcase inside a locker, waiting for Tarek to come retrieve it so they could catch him red-handed. Yet the agents waited until late night and Tarek never showed up. Then, the local police called, reporting that the thief with the gold coin suitcase had turned himself in, planning to deliver it to Alex and betray her for the bounty. Peter was furious, but since it didn't jeopardize the Tarek case, Neil calmly said it was just killing two birds with one stone. As they argued, Neil suddenly remembered his old pink diamond heist. He rushed to the locker. Sure enough, the suitcase was gone. Tariq's crew had copied his signature move, drilling a hole through the back of the locker to pull the suitcase out. Peter went to Neil's place in frustration. Neil and Mozzie explained that Alex was being hunted by a mysterious organization. Since it didn't affect the Tarek case, Peter let it go. Mozzie had tracked down the suitcase's true owner, a Detroit gang that the thief had accidentally stolen from. Together, they came up with a plan. Peter would pose as a Detroit gangster demanding the return of the gold, hoping fear would make Tarek slip up. The next day after class, Peter confronted Tarek as he was leaving campus, claiming to be from the Detroit gang coming to collect. With Mozzie coaching him on gangster slang, Peter sounded surprisingly convincing. Tarek tried to deny everything until Peter pulled a gun, flashed crime scene photos, and threatened him. Though Tarek wasn't in them, Peter's aggression rattled him badly. Peter snarled, "That coin's worth $2 million. I don't want it, but you'd better pay me $3 by tomorrow, or you can say goodbye to your hands." Terrified, Tarek went to a black market dealer that night. Alex, after haggling, he handed over $2 million in gold. Still short $1 million, Tarek pulled out the genuine manuscript of the stolen masterpiece to make up the difference. Selling art on the black market was Alex's specialty. She stayed calm and betrayed nothing. As soon as the deal wrapped up, Peter's team stormed in, arresting Tarek and seizing all the evidence. The mysterious organization behind Vincent Adler was still hunting Alex, so Peter arranged fake IDs and a ticket to Italy for her to lay low. After the case closed, Peter returned to Tariq's class and arrested all the student accomplices. However, Peter still hadn't turned in the music box. When they examined it, they found a small key inside, possibly the key to unlocking the box itself. Neil went to see Alex off at the airport, only to find several stolen masterpieces in her luggage that the FBI hadn't yet recovered. Alex smiled, saying they were her payment. Neil laughed and agreed. They bid each other a sincere farewell once more. But if Alex was being followed, so was Neil. Before leaving, she handed him a small component of the music box she'd found earlier. Neither Neil, Peter, nor Diana realized that Neil now held the true key to the music box, while Peter unknowingly had the rest. The short, unassuming man with a shy demeanor was, in truth, a criminal genius, and Neil's most trusted ally. His name, Mozzie. Mozzie had a quiet crush on a waitress named Gina but lacked the courage to confess. He visited her diner under the pretense of small talk and played her favorite deduction games. One day, Mozzie sensed something was wrong. Two burly men entered looking for Gina with menacing intent. Her expression changed. She subtly signaled Mozzie before leaving with them. By now, Neil was serving as a special consultant for the FBI. During lunch, he got a message from Mozzie asking to meet in the elevator. Mozzie was notoriously cautious. He'd never step foot inside the FBI. Seeing him dressed like a secret agent, sneaking into the very building he feared most, Neil instantly knew something serious was going on. Standing just outside the camera's view, Mozzie quickly told Neil everything about Gina. Of course, Neil already knew his friend was secretly in love with her. Mozzie, clearly anxious, said that based on the symbol Gina left in her book, she must have been kidnapped. Neil, trying to stay rational, thought Mozzie might be overreacting. Maybe Gina just had some personal issue. But Mozzie was adamant Gina was in real danger. He even brought a file on her, begging Neil to use his FBI access to find her. Neil didn't want to alarm anyone, so he quietly asked rookie agent Lauren Cruz to look into it. Lauren found that Gina had been calling the same number repeatedly. Neil asked her to trace the owner. While waiting for the results, Neil and Mozzie went to Gina's apartment. Mozzie was a bundle of nerves, part fear, part excitement. He was worried about Gina but also secretly afraid she might have fallen for Neil instead. Peeking through the peephole, Mozzie saw the apartment in disarray. They broke the lock and went inside. Meanwhile, Peter was finally having dinner with his wife, Elizabeth, when Lauren reported what she'd found and mentioned Neil's involvement in Gina's case. Since both of them knew Mozzie, they immediately realized Gina was the woman he had a crush on. Peter began to suspect Neil and Mozzie were keeping secrets from him. Back at Gina's place, Neil and Mozzie, both criminal masterminds, took one look around and knew the break-in was recent. That confirmed Gina was indeed in danger. As they searched the apartment, they discovered Gina had a boyfriend, shattering Mozzie's heart instantly. They dusted for fingerprints. Aside from Gina's and her boyfriend's, there was a third, unfamiliar set, likely the kidnappers. Then they noticed something else, Gina's favorite word game with Mozzie. She'd left a hidden clue, the name of a shop called Sloan. Mozzie dashed off immediately. After dinner, Peter returned to the office and pulled the elevator footage. He saw Neil speaking with a mysterious man. Though the camera didn't catch his face, one glance was enough. Peter knew it was Mozzie. Knowing Mozzie's fear of the bureau, Peter realized something serious must have happened for him to show up there. By now, Neil and Mozzie had reached the Sloan shop, a place that had existed for years but never actually opened for business. Suspicious. Mozzie kept watch outside while Neil quietly picked the lock and slipped in. Inside, drug lord Navarro was meeting with his lieutenant, Vincent. Neil overheard them say Gina's boyfriend had stolen $100,000 from Navarro and vanished. So Navarro had Gina kidnapped to get to her boyfriend. From Gina's call records, Peter discovered that the number she'd been calling belonged to her boyfriend, Tommy, a small-time gangster. Tommy himself wasn't the problem, but the man behind him was the Colombian cartel boss running operations in New York, a ruthless killer. Peter panicked, realizing Neil and Mozzie were in deep trouble. He called Neil and ordered a trace on Neil's tracking anklet. Neil's phone buzzed. He shut it off immediately, but the vibration drew Navarro's attention. Outside, Mozzie spotted several armed thugs returning and quickly texted Neil a warning. With both exits blocked, Neil ducked into a side room and locked himself in. Trapped between Navarro upstairs and his men coming up from below, Neil was a fish in a barrel. Fortunately, Peter tracked Neil's signal and arrived just in time. Pretending to arrest Neil Caffrey, he used it as an excuse to extract him safely. Peter knew Navarro's cigar shop never did real business, yet his tax reports showed huge profits, a classic front for money laundering. But without hard evidence, they had to back off. Once outside, Neil regrouped with Mozzie, and the three met back at the FBI office. Mozzie, surrounded by federal agents, looked like a man in hell. Based on what Neil overheard, the picture became clear. Gina's boyfriend, Tommy, had stolen $100,000 from Navarro and disappeared, leaving Gina as collateral damage. Diana then reported that Gina's credit card had just been used to buy dried fruit at a nearby park 20 minutes ago. Mozzie's eyes widened. Gina's allergic to dried fruit, he exclaimed. This was definitely a clue Gina had left for Mozzie. Peter's team rushed to the park immediately, but Gina was long gone. The dried fruit vendor remembered her clearly. He said that after making her purchase, Gina sat on a bench across the path. There were no security cameras nearby, but plenty of tourists with cameras and camcorders. Peter immediately called for backup and began collecting cameras from tourists, reviewing each photo to see if anyone had caught Gina on film. Sure enough, they found her in one of the photos, Gina sitting on the bench, seemingly waiting for someone. The photo only showed part of the scene, but when combined with shots from other angles, it revealed someone sitting beside her. It was the drug dealers. They were using Gina as bait to lure Tommy out. When he appeared in the distance, Gina waved to signal him. Realizing Gina had been captured, Tommy panicked and ran away without looking back. While fleeing, he tossed his phone into a trash can. The FBI recovered it and found an unopened voice message. It was from Navarro ordering Tommy to meet him at 5 p.m. the next day, or he'd never see Gina again. The team realized they had to find Tommy first, otherwise Navarro would never show up. Even if they arrested Navarro's men now, none would admit to kidnapping Gina. Neil and Mozzie, drawing on their criminal experience, figured the first thing a fugitive like Tommy would do was get fake IDs. They checked with a few forgers they knew in the area, but none had seen Tommy. That left only one option, Dorian, a forger with whom they had bad blood. They went to see him. Neil claimed he was being hunted by the drug cartel, while Agent Jones posed as a Colombian enforcer tailing him. Hearing that, Dorian panicked. He blurted out that a guy named Tommy had already made fake papers and disappeared, leaving him to take the blame. Terrified of the cartel's wrath, Dorian turned defensive when Jones entered, claiming Neil and Mozzie were the ones who'd forged Tommy's IDs. He even revealed the alias Tommy was using. That was exactly what Neil needed. Jones pretended to arrest them roughly to sell the act. Using the alias, Peter traced Tommy to a hotel and arrested him on the spot. Under questioning, Tommy confessed to stealing $100,000 from Navarro. The cash was part of a Dia-seized batch, all with consecutive serial numbers. No wonder Navarro was desperate to recover it. When the time came, Peter brought Tommy to the sting location, surrounded by FBI agents ready to rescue Gina. Mozzie, however, was fuming. He didn't trust Tommy and thought the coward would ruin everything. Sure enough, when Peter and Neil checked, they discovered Mozzie had slipped away and gone to the meeting himself. There, Navarro and his men arrived, but without Gina. Mozzie introduced himself as Tommy's broker, demanding to see her before handing over the money. Navarro grew furious, but Mozzie calmly smirked and said, "You idiots, FBI's got this place surrounded." Peter, not knowing Mozzie's plan, ordered his team to pull back temporarily to gather evidence. But with his photographic memory, Mozzie recalled the FBI's entire layout and led Navarro straight through a blind spot, vanishing with him. Peter was horrified. Neil, however, recognized the hidden signal. Mozzie was triggering their long-agreed perfect exchange plan. Navarro brought Mozzie to Gina's location. Seeing her alive, Mozzie finally exhaled in relief. Navarro, obsessed with the money, ordered Mozzie to hand it over immediately. Deep down, Mozzie was terrified, but outwardly, he forced himself to stay calm. The perfect exchange was a contingency plan Neil and Mozzie had made long ago. If one of them was ever caught, the other would trigger the plan to rescue him. This time, Mozzie planned to arrange a meeting between Navarro and Tommy, but only he would control the time and place. The rule was simple: choose a location where neither side could bring weapons, forcing a clean exchange. The Sidon City Library was the perfect spot, a place Neil and Mozzie had scouted long ago for emergencies. But Navarro wasn't stupid. He'd no doubt smuggle in firepower through his men. Sure enough, outside the library, Peter spotted Vincent, Navarro's right-hand man, lurking nearby. Then it hit Peter: if Navarro had altered the time and planted a sniper, the broker, Mozzie, was already a dead man walking. Peter immediately aborted the operation, seized Vincent, and forced him to take him to Navarro's location. Just as Peter suspected, Navarro had everything set: the sniper, the trap, and no more use for Mozzie. Peter stormed in, ordering the cartel to drop their guns. Navarro scoffed, mocking him for walking in alone. Just then, the FBI tactical team burst in. The drug ring was disarmed and arrested on the spot. Mozzie, thankfully unharmed, finally relaxed after confirming Gina was safe. But sadly, love was one-sided. Gina didn't feel the same, leaving Mozzie quietly heartbroken. Soon after, another woman entered the picture: Sarah Ellis, a beautiful and sharp bounty hunter who recovered insured assets. For every valuable item she recovered for an insurance company, she earned a 2% commission on its worth. Right after leaving her office, Sarah spotted a missing Mercedes-Benz, an easy $9,000 payday. Her connection with Neil, however, was complicated. 5 years earlier, he had stolen a Raphael painting worth $7 million. Sarah had been the insurance company's representative on the case, but Neil's meticulous planning left the court with no solid evidence. The charges were dropped, Neil walked free, and Sarah lost her $140,000 fee, a bitter defeat. Since then, every meeting between them was pure combustion. Their paths crossed again when Sarah's company lost $100 million in unregistered bearer bonds. Peter, Lauren Cruz, and Neil were assigned the case. Sarah suspected a shady tycoon named Edgar Halbridge. When Sarah arrived to assist the FBI, Neil was far from thrilled. Peter told him to set personal grudges aside. Sarah brought a recorder and openly declared she'd capture every word Neil said, hoping he'd slip and reveal something about the Raphael painting. Thanks to Sarah's prior research, the FBI's job became much easier. They hacked Edgar's email and found correspondence with a well-known international broker. The emails didn't specify the job, but Peter was convinced Edgar had hired the broker to retrieve the bonds. Since bearer bonds can be redeemed by anyone, whoever held them could cash in instantly. Peter alerted Canadian authorities to intercept the broker during a layover in Toronto. Meanwhile, the FBI removed Neil's tracking anklet and sent him undercover as the broker to meet Edgar and uncover the bond's location. The Canadians could only detain the real broker for 24 hours. Neil had that much time to get results. Peter planted a hidden mic and tracker in Neil's watch. If he said the phrase long-distance flight, the FBI would move in immediately. Neil arrived at the meeting point from the emails. A black Lincoln pulled up, driven by Edgar's bodyguard, Nico. Dressed exactly as the emails described, Neil drew no suspicion and got in. Moments later, Nico activated a signal jammer, cutting off the FBI's feed completely. Neil opened the briefcase Nico handed him, only to find gun parts and a silencer inside. That's when he realized the encrypted emails weren't about retrieving bonds, they were a hit order. Realizing how serious things were, Neil immediately said the coded phrase long-distance flight, triggering the FBI's action plan. Unfortunately, he didn't know the signal was jammed. When the FBI failed to respond, Neil had no choice but to start assembling the pistol to avoid suspicion. Nico drove Neil to the target's apartment building. Staying calm, Neil told him to keep the engine running and wait. The moment he stepped out, the signal returned, revealing that the car itself had been jamming it. Peter was equally shocked when the tracker came back online. He tried to locate Neil, but the command van was miles away, at least 20 minutes out. Then, checking the address, Peter was stunned. The assassination target was Sarah Ellis. Sarah, still awake, heard a noise and instinctively grabbed her gun. When Neil entered the bedroom, both froze in shock. Neil quickly explained everything, and they realized it was all a terrible mistake. The man Edgar had hired wasn't a broker at all, it was a professional hitman posing as one. At that moment, Peter called Sarah to verify Neil's story and explain the situation. Since Nico was waiting outside, Sarah and Neil staged a few fake gunshots to keep up the act. Neil left Sarah's house, pretending he had completed the mission. Back at the FBI, Peter drafted a fake public notice declaring Sarah Ellis dead, allowing Neil to keep posing as the broker. For safety, Sarah was escorted to the FBI office and placed in a conference room. She still couldn't understand why Edgar wanted her dead. Investigating bonds wasn't exactly a capital crime. The next morning, Neil and Mozzie secretly visited the Air Traffic Control Bureau to dig for more evidence. Debris from a recent plane explosion was under investigation, and it appeared to be a deliberate act of sabotage. Neil knew that if they could get the black box recording, they might uncover the truth. When a security guard approached, Neil quickly lied that he worked for an insurance company investigating the explosion for a claim. His smooth talking completely sold the story. The real black box had been sent to Washington, but the office still had a backup copy. The guard said he couldn't release the recording himself, but could send a copy to the insurance company. Neil handed him Sarah's business card, confirming her as an insurance representative. The guard agreed to send the copy the next day. Back at the bureau, the team analyzed Edgar's real motive for targeting Sarah. Turns out Sarah had been investigating Edgar for over a month and was close to uncovering several dark secrets. One of them, 20 years ago, Edgar had bought an apartment that had remained vacant ever since, dilapidated but untouched. Peter realized it was highly suspicious. Edgar might be hiding something inside. He suspected Sarah had gotten too close to that secret, prompting Edgar to try to silence her. Neil, posing again as the broker, went to Edgar's mansion. When Nico tried to frisk him, Neil staged a minor scuffle to slip past. He finally met Edgar face to face and casually brought up the old apartment Sarah had asked about, watching Edgar's reaction closely. The hit landed. Edgar visibly tensed, trying to stay calm but failing to hide the fear in his eyes. Neil pushed further, demanding $2 million to keep the apartment's secret quiet. Edgar reluctantly agreed to wire the money within 2 days. Back in the command van, Peter confirmed their theory: something crucial was hidden in that old apartment. That afternoon, Edgar sent workers to renovate the place. Peter and his team were already waiting nearby. Sure enough, they found a large bed positioned oddly. Upon opening it, they discovered a decayed human skeleton inside. Forensics confirmed the remains belonged to the real Edgar Halbridge. However, due to the age of the remains, the exact time of death couldn't be determined. The team realized, horrified, the man they'd been dealing with all along was an imposter. 20 years ago, the real Edgar had no living relatives. Taking advantage of that, an imposter stole his identity and inherited everything he owned. To cover his tracks, he bought the old apartment and hid the real Edgar's body there. No wonder he never let anyone near that building all these years. When Sarah started digging into the apartment, Edgar panicked. He hired a hitman to eliminate her before she uncovered the truth. For now, it was all just speculation. The remains were too old to confirm identity with absolute certainty. Peter and Neil devised a plan to make Edgar expose himself. Peter met Edgar alone and told him the FBI had discovered a skeleton in his old apartment. Edgar feigned calm, denying any knowledge of the body. It was exactly as Peter expected. Peter then pulled out a photo of Sarah and Neil, saying they were wanted con artists, and asked if Edgar knew them. Edgar froze, and Peter added, "The FBI's looking for Sarah. She's uncovered a lot of your secrets." Before leaving, Peter discreetly planted a listening device under Edgar's desk. As soon as Peter left, Edgar called his men, ordering 2 things: eliminate Sarah and Neil, and move the bearer bonds immediately. He already had an escape plan in motion. Meanwhile, Mozzie discovered that the Aviation Bureau had sent a copy of the black box recording to Sarah's insurance company address. Neil realized he had to get that package before Edgar did. Edgar gathered the $100 million in bonds he'd hidden, preparing to flee, but the FBI had been watching and arrested him on the spot. Peter charged him with murder and theft of the bonds. But when Peter checked the Lincoln's backseat, he found a half-eaten bar of dark chocolate, the favorite snack of the real broker. Shocked, Peter immediately contacted Jones and the Toronto police to check on the real broker's status. It turned out that after Nico's arrangements, the real broker had been released and was already carrying out his original assignment. Meanwhile, Neil worked his charm to get close to Sarah and retrieve the black box recording, offering to walk her home. Sure enough, Sarah was carrying the package. It contained the recording. Neil was about to steal it when he heard a noise at the door. He pulled Sarah aside just as the real hitman broke in. The two worked in perfect sync. By the time the assassin entered, Sarah already had her gun aimed at his head. Through the bug, Peter overheard the plan and arrived just in time with the FBI team to arrest the assassin. Sarah thanked Neil. Peter asked Neil to accompany him, forcing him to leave while the recording stayed in Sarah's possession. Sarah, convinced that Neil was the most brilliant criminal mind of his generation, decided even a lie detector couldn't crack him. During questioning, Neil remained calm and composed, giving flawless answers that fooled the polygraph entirely. Yet Sarah knew him too well. She was certain he'd find a way to get that recording. In truth, during the test, Neil discreetly picked up a staple and pricked his finger, keeping his heartbeat elevated to outsmart the detector. Neil remained haunted by Kate's death, determined to uncover the truth behind the plane explosion. After retrieving the black box, he hid the recording, wanting to prepare himself before listening to it. But before he could, Sarah arrived at the FBI with another lie detector test, ready to confront Neil once again. Sarah soon realized the letter from the Aviation Bureau was missing. Though she hadn't opened it, her gut told her the contents were tied to Kate's plane explosion. Naturally, Neil became the prime suspect. He'd passed the lie detector once, but Peter knew Sarah was a relentless hunter and could only wish Neil good luck surviving her wrath. Meanwhile, the FBI was investigating a jewelry heist. Using his criminal connections, Neil posed as a buyer to get close to the thief. During the deal, Peter's team surrounded the area, ready to move in the moment Neil gave the signal. It should have been a straightforward bust, until Neil noticed a toy car in the thief's bag and signaled the FBI to hold fire. The thief turned out to be a woman, and she'd brought her child with her. Peter and Neil interrogated Catherine, a jewelry store manager who had stolen from her own shop. Catherine confessed she did it for her adopted child from Chechnya. The adoption was legal, handled through an international lawyer named Donovan. 6 months earlier, Donovan contacted her, claiming the child's birth mother had surfaced, demanding $50,000 in emotional damages or she'd take the child back. Deeply attached to the child, Catherine borrowed $50,000 from her friend June and asked Donovan to handle it. She thought the ordeal was over until a few days ago. Donovan returned, saying the mother now demanded $200,000 within a week. Desperate, Catherine resorted to stealing jewelry to raise the cash. Peter and Neil found the story suspicious. They suspected Donovan was orchestrating an extortion scheme. Peter confronted Donovan, but he denied everything, claiming he was only a messenger, not the one demanding money. As Peter left, a burly man entered the office, someone Peter immediately recognized. Running his face, Peter identified him as Clark, aka the White Shark, a member of the Abramov crime syndicate in New York. What was a lawyer doing with mobsters? The question set off alarm bells for both Peter and Neil. They theorized that Donovan was exploiting adoption records, telling families the birth mother wanted compensation, then pocketing the money. To confirm it, they headed to Abramov's turf. It was a heavily guarded casino with a daily changing password at the entrance. Without a warrant, the FBI was stuck, but not Neil. Spotting a guard nearby, Neil told Peter to call him, then secretly slipped the phone into the man's jacket pocket. Over speakerphone, they heard the password loud and clear. Neil signaled Peter and smoothly blended in, making his way inside the casino. After scouting the floor, Neil spotted the mob boss himself, Abramov. He approached confidently, introducing himself as Nick Halden, one of his old aliases known in gambling circles. Impressed, Abramov invited Nick to an exclusive high-stakes party that Friday, requiring a $100,000 buy-in. Neil accepted without hesitation, chatting casually while gathering intel and charming a casino hostess along the way. From her, Neil learned that Donovan was a regular gambler there, and, digging deeper, found he owed $200,000 in gambling debt. After failing to extort Catherine, Donovan had withdrawn his savings, planning one last big bet to win it back. The FBI devised a plan. Neil would attend the party as Nick Halden, pushing Donovan to the edge. Meanwhile, Jones and Diana would pose as a wealthy couple seeking to adopt, approaching Donovan for his services. Pretending to be successful but infertile, the couple claimed they wanted an international adoption to avoid local complications. Donovan was cautious, asking a barrage of detailed questions, but the FBI was ready. Jones and Diana answered flawlessly, leaving no gaps. Gaining confidence, Donovan loosened up and even showed them a photo of the child in Chechnya. Jones and Diana played the part perfectly, saying they adored the child and wanted to adopt right away. Donovan mentioned a $50,000 compensation for the birth mother. The couple eagerly agreed, saying money wasn't an issue, even a few $100,000 if needed. Meanwhile, Neil wanted to read Donovan's tells before the high-stakes game, so he asked Peter to meet him that evening. While Neil was at Sarah's place, she showed up with police in tow. She had discovered he'd stolen the letter. She obtained a search warrant, and soon the police found the stolen letter that Mozzie had retrieved for Neil. Meanwhile, Peter summoned Donovan to the bureau, intentionally stalling with small talk to study his behavior. Watching closely, Peter noticed Donovan blinked slightly whenever he lied. Just then, Diana rushed in with bad news. Sarah had Neil in custody. Peter hurried to Sarah's, explaining that Neil stole the letter only to uncover the truth about Kate's plane explosion and that he was currently helping the bureau with the adoption fraud case. Understanding Neil's motives, Sarah relented and dropped the charges. Peter requested a $100,000 buy-in from the NYPD, removed Neil's anklet, and gave him free rein for the operation. At the casino, players dropped out one by one until only Donovan and Neil remained neck and neck. Remembering Peter's tip, Neil watched closely. When Donovan went all in, Neil smiled and pushed all his chips forward. "You have a kid, right? Yes. Then let's go all in." With no escape, Donovan revealed his cards and lost everything. Neil returned to the bureau, reporting that his $100,000 buy-in had turned into $800,000 in winnings. Meanwhile, Diana got a call from Donovan. He told the adoptive couple that the paperwork was ready, but the birth mother had changed her mind again, demanding another $200,000. Jones and Diana agreed, pretending to send the money immediately. In reality, Donovan had already been detained by the Chechen mob for his gambling debts. Diana brought the $200,000 bait, while Peter's team followed at a distance, ready to intervene. When they arrived, Clark ambushed them and seized the cash. It was the debt Donovan owed. Forced to blow her cover, Diana called in the FBI team, who stormed the scene. Peter ordered everyone to stand down. Their real target was Donovan, not the mob. At that moment, Abramov appeared. Peter warned him that the FBI had eyes on his casino and could drop by daily if he didn't cooperate. When Peter revealed Donovan was exploiting children for money, Abramov, himself an orphan, was disgusted and agreed to help. Together, they staged a trap. Abramov summoned Donovan, claiming he'd caught Neil, aka Nick Halden. Abramov accused Neil of cheating and demanded Donovan pay him $200,000 as restitution. Terrified, Donovan stammered that he was broke and waiting for a couple to bring the money. Abramov pretended to lose his temper and ordered his men to teach Neil a lesson. Neil's staged screams echoed from below, terrifying Donovan. When Abramov returned and growled, "Now, are you paying or not?" Donovan broke down and confessed everything. He admitted he was running an international adoption scam, preying on wealthy families' emotions for profit. The entire confession was recorded by the FBI. By the time Donovan realized he'd been played, it was too late. Seeing Neil walk out unharmed, Donovan finally realized it had all been a setup between the FBI and Abramov. In the end, Donovan was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud and extortion. The FBI managed to recover the stolen jewelry. Catherine was sentenced to probation and community service, but at least she and her adopted son could stay together and start over. After the case wrapped up, Neil returned home only to find Sarah waiting for him. She'd been investigating Neil and Kate and confirmed that Kate had indeed died in the mysterious plane explosion. Sarah handed him the black box, saying it might be the only clue left. Neil and Mozzie played the recording. It was Kate's voice on a phone call, but the other person's voice was inaudible. They realized the only way to uncover the truth was to identify who Kate had been talking to. Meanwhile, at a luxury car dealership, Neil, ever the master observer, could tell who could actually afford the cars with just one glance. A plainly dressed man walked in and was ignored by the other salesmen, but Neil instantly recognized him as a genuine buyer. Neil approached him, grabbed the keys, and invited him for a test drive. His coworkers thought he was wasting time until he came back with a signed purchase for a Porsche. Turns out, Neil wasn't just a criminal genius, he was a sales genius too. But why was Neil working at a car dealership in the first place? It all started with Agent Hughes. During a morning briefing, Hughes motioned for Peter and Neil to step inside. They learned that an agent named Franklin had been demoted for having an affair with a confidential informant. But a few days ago, Franklin hacked into the Federal Witness Protection Database to access files on a case. It was a serious federal offense, and Franklin had since gone on the run. The marshals launched a full-scale manhunt and requested FBI assistance. Hughes ordered Peter to work with a marshal named Decker and use Neil's years of experience evading the Bureau to track Franklin down. Decker, however, wasn't thrilled about sharing the case. Peter began setting up his strategy, only to find Decker had already made a move. Something felt off. Peter and Neil suspected Franklin might be covering for someone or was being framed. They decided to reach out to Rebecca, the woman Franklin had been involved with. She was a saleswoman at a luxury dealership, and one look explained exactly why Franklin had fallen for her. Peter posed as a customer and asked for a test drive, taking a Lamborghini out and leaving Neil stranded at the showroom. Never one to waste an opportunity, Neil claimed he was a new trainee learning from Rebecca. She humored him, and the staff didn't suspect a thing. In fact, they encouraged Neil to take another client out. Meanwhile, Peter revealed his true identity. Rebecca insisted she'd cut ties with Franklin long ago and knew nothing about his actions. Peter earnestly explained that Franklin was once his colleague and needed a way to clear his name before the marshals caught him. Meanwhile, Neil actually sold a Lamborghini. The entire dealership was stunned. Neil smiled, saying the commission should go to Rebecca since she trained him. Using the distraction, Neil accessed Rebecca's computer and pulled up her client records. He discovered she had scheduled a test drive with someone named Crawford, an FBI alias, meaning the meeting was fabricated. Neil deduced Franklin had met her that day. GPS showed the car had gone to a remote area. Diana dug deeper and found that Franklin had been investigating an antitrust case involving the marshals themselves. While Peter and Neil were processing this, Decker suddenly showed up, demanding to know what they'd asked Rebecca. Peter played dumb, but Neil realized Decker had been tracking their movements. Neil remembered that every parolee's anklet was monitored by the marshals, meaning Decker had been tracing Neil's every move. Peter and Neil split up. Peter went home to review the antitrust files, while Neil stayed at the bureau to monitor Decker's next move. Just then, a shadow flickered past the window. Peter instinctively drew his gun. The visitor turned out to be Franklin. He'd heard from Rebecca that Peter was looking for him. Knowing Peter's long-standing reputation for integrity, Franklin trusted he'd at least listen. They met cautiously, and Franklin began to tell his side of the story. He'd spent 2 years investigating antitrust corruption and had finally secured a witness willing to testify, but a week before the trial, the man was killed in a staged hit-and-run. Franklin started suspecting the marshals, since they were the only ones with access to witness identities and safe house locations. But as soon as he started digging, his superiors received an anonymous tip about his affair with Rebecca, a clear retaliation by Decker. Yesterday, Franklin hacked the witness database and discovered that Gavin, the lawyer handling the antitrust case, had suspicious financial ties to Decker. Realizing he'd been exposed, Decker launched a manhunt to silence him. Franklin and Rebecca had visited Gavin's law firm the previous day, and today he planned to return. He was certain evidence of bribery was hidden there. Peter deduced that if Franklin knew the location, Neil likely tracked it too, and Decker might already be there destroying the evidence. Believing Franklin's innocence, Peter asked him to hand over his gun so they could work together to clear his name. As they arrived at Gavin's office, Neil and Jones called in. Decker had left the bureau 30 minutes earlier. Peter quickly filled them in, concluding that Decker was the leak behind the witness's death. Neil and Jones warned that Decker might already be at the firm, but it was too far for backup to reach in time. Franklin went in first. When Peter entered, he found Decker shredding documents, boasting that he'd set a trap for Franklin. Peter ordered him to stop, but Decker snapped back, accusing Peter of covering for Franklin. Guns were drawn, tension thick as smoke. Realizing words were useless, Peter and Franklin bolted for the back exit. They reached Gavin's private garage, where 2 Lamborghinis gleamed under the lights. Peter phoned Neil for remote start instructions, while Franklin called Rebecca for ignition help. It turned into a tech duel, and Neil won by a landslide. Following Neil's directions, Peter fired up the car. When Decker burst in, the 2 men sped off in style. But the evidence was gone, leaving Franklin crushed, his innocence now impossible to prove. Peter reassured him, "Trust me and my team, we'll find another way." Soon after, Neil and Jones arrived. Neil reminded Peter that his anklet made him easy to track. The marshals would be on them soon. He removed the Lamborghini's tracker to throw them off, buying Peter precious time. Peter ditched his phone and used Diana as a relay for communication. Back at the bureau, Hughes summoned Neil. Decker had beaten them to it, accusing Peter of aiding Franklin's escape and destroying evidence. Neil explained everything. Hughes decided to wait. Whoever uncovered the other's crime first would prove their innocence. Just then, Mozzie arrived, leading Neil and Jones to an abandoned building, a secret safe haven he and Neil often used for meditation and scheming. Peter, hiding inside, worried about losing contact with his family and asked Mozzie to relay a message. Using intel from Peter, Diana discovered that Gavin was a 100% win rate lawyer who played dirty. Most of his witnesses had conveniently vanished. As they regrouped, Decker stormed in, forcing Neil and Jones to accompany him to Peter's house, sure he'd return there. Meanwhile, at the hideout, Peter sat deep in thought. Listening to Mozzie ramble sparked a bold idea. He turned to Mozzie. "How'd you like to run a con, officially sanctioned by law enforcement? A legal con, count me in," he exclaimed. Decker had Neil and Jones stationed outside Peter's house, his way of keeping them close and cutting off any chance for Peter to make contact. Catching Neil's stare, Decker smugly dangled the electronic anklet key, one of which belonged to Neil. Showing off in front of a master thief, a fatal mistake, and Neil knew it. Outside, Mozzie appeared near Peter's home. Lauren Cruz didn't recognize him, but Neil and Jones did instantly. Elizabeth also knew him. Mozzie's purpose, to deliver word that Peter was safe, and to help pull off Peter's elaborate sting plan. Earlier, Mozzie had coordinated with Diana to lure Gavin into the setup. Diana called Gavin, saying they'd found his stolen Lamborghini, but it was in tragic condition. Furious, Gavin demanded to see it. Meanwhile, Mozzie lingered around Peter's house, then pretended to leave by taxi. Seeing Mozzie's suspicious behavior, Decker ordered his men to tail him. Neil and Jones followed. Mozzie headed straight to Rebecca's dealership, fully aware they were on his tail. The moment Decker stepped out, Neil deftly slipped the anklet key from his belt. Mozzie calmly approached Rebecca and told her to act like they were close. Rebecca looked confused. "I talked to your special friend," Mozzie whispered. She instantly caught on. Decker observed from outside, unsure what Mozzie was up to. Jones deliberately spoke loudly, pretending to guess they were talking about Franklin and Peter. Then Neil's phone rang, right in front of Decker. He answered. It was Peter and Hughes on the line. Decker asked who it was. Neil said Agent Hughes. Suspicious, Decker grabbed the phone, and sure enough, Hughes's voice came through. Peter outlined the final phase of the plan, instructing Neil to play his role perfectly from the outside. Decker had no idea he was already caught in an FBI trap. Meanwhile, Diana brought Gavin to the supposed crash site. He still thought it was just about the car. She told him she'd handle the insurance claim and asked him to sign the paperwork. Furious, Gavin signed, unknowingly sealing his own confession. Neil fanned the flames, whispering to Decker that Gavin was cutting a deal with the FBI and turning him in. Watching Gavin sign, Decker panicked and stormed inside to confront him. The moment Decker drew his gun, Jones reacted instantly, ready for anything. Diana stepped in, declaring that Decker had confessed to bribing Gavin and threatening witnesses into silence. Terrified, Gavin blurted out, "It wasn't me, Decker made me do it." At that moment, Peter and Franklin arrived. Cornered, Decker had no choice but to surrender. Neil patted him on the shoulder, discreetly returning the key, but kept the one that unlocked his own anklet. Franklin was officially cleared of all charges. The case was finally closed. Later, Mozzie called Neil. He decoded the black box recording from Kate's plane. In it, Kate was speaking with Fowler, a high-ranking FBI agent. Clearly, his role went far beyond protective custody. Neil stared at his anklet key, deep in thought. Cut to an upscale restaurant, wealthy diners playing a credit card roulette for a $2,000 meal. They dropped their cards into the waiter's hat. Whoever's card got drawn, paid. For Neil, it was child's play. With a flick of his fingers, Neil subtly pulled out the exact card he wanted, earning astonished looks from everyone. Even for these finance elites, $2,000 stung a little. Now, Neil Caffrey, the high-IQ con artist, stood as a special consultant for the FBI. Meanwhile, the Division's lead engineer had just developed the GEM processor, a dual-layered decryption system that had caught the Pentagon's attention. Amid fierce competition between tech corporations, the police began targeting companies competing with high-tech firm Beginner, but Agent Peter had a different approach. He looked into the movements of Ken, Beginner's founder, and discovered that on the night the lead engineer was murdered, Ken had secretly met with him. Yet Ken told the police they'd never met. That small lie was enough for Peter to grow suspicious, so while the police chased rival firms, the FBI quietly turned its eye on Beginner. Coincidentally, Beginner's accounting department was undergoing an audit. Peter seized the chance, posing as a financial inspector, to go undercover. With a degree in accounting, Peter slipped into the role effortlessly. He arrived at Beginner as a so-called treasury auditor, and Ken didn't suspect a thing. Facing a supposed government auditor, Ken treated Peter with the utmost respect. Peter began his inspection. Meanwhile, Agent Diana teamed up with Mozzie under Peter's orders to continue investigating the plane explosion that killed Kate. Neil, back at the FBI, eagerly awaited the internal files Peter and Clinton were retrieving. Ken even assigned Peter his own secretary, endless luxury coffee, and a fancy apartment. Once alone, Peter linked up his device while Clinton successfully hacked into Beginner's database and backed up all key data. The FBI found nothing unusual, except one thing: someone had been repeatedly trying to access the late engineer's computer. They'd tried passwords from his birthday to his dog's name, but nothing worked. That meant there was a spy inside the company, someone close to the engineer, trying to cover their tracks. Ken was ruled out, since he already had full access to the engineer's credentials. Peter needed a way to get close to the mid-level managers. Noticing that Ken wanted the audit done quickly, he leveraged it, introducing Neil as his marketing consultant friend and recommending him for a job. Sure enough, Neil was hired on the spot. Within a day, his charm had the elite staff wrapped around his finger, even inviting him to their weekend hangout. During dinner, Neil accidentally let slip that Peter, the government auditor, might have found evidence tied to the engineer's death. That one line sent ripples through the group, especially whoever the hidden spy was. The lavish dinner cost $2,000. When the bill came, everyone tossed their cards into Neil's hat for a random draw. With a subtle gesture, Neil made sure the waiter drew the card of a smug coworker who'd belittled him earlier. Not long after the dinner, a female employee named Jessica snuck into Peter's office, rifling through his cabinet. Neil followed her and caught her in the act. She tried to cover it up, but her panic gave her away. That suspicious move confirmed Neil's hunch: Jessica was the spy. He hurried to Peter's apartment to discuss their next step. Meanwhile, Diana and Mozzie joined forces to dig deeper into Kate's mysterious plane explosion. While the homeowner was away, Mozzie carefully pulled out the documents Diana had given him. Inside, he found a sheet of music, Mozart's Sonata for piano in F major. The discovery instantly raised Mozzie's suspicions. Meanwhile, Neil decided to dig deeper into Jessica. When Jessica stepped out for coffee, Neil slipped into her office. Several sealed files were neatly arranged on her desk. He sprayed a chemical mist across the folders, revealing faint lettering. They were files about Ken, Beginner's founder. Just then, Jessica returned. She tried to stay calm but instantly realized Neil had been snooping. Neil reported his findings to Peter, though neither of them could yet figure out why Jessica was investigating Ken unless she believed he was next on the hit list. Meanwhile, Mozzie met with Neil, explaining that the piece was written in 1775, the same year the mysterious music box, fought over by multiple factions, was created. They theorized the tune inside the box might be that very sonata, meaning Diana must have heard it before, which could only mean she or Peter had the box. Before Mozzie could continue, he noticed someone tailing them. It was Jessica. He immediately changed course and followed her. Startled, Jessica ducked into an alley and aimed a gun straight at him. That's when she broke down the truth. She was the murdered engineer's girlfriend, and she vowed to expose whoever was behind his death. Jessica suspected Ken was responsible. Beginner had announced they developed the gem processor, but it was a lie, a ploy to secure a lucrative defense contract. In reality, the technology never existed. After securing the deal, Ken silenced the only man who knew the truth, the lead engineer. Determined to prove it, Jessica learned that Ken regularly destroyed sensitive documents in his high-security office. Peter and Neil devised a plan to break in. The problem: entry required Ken's ID card and voice password. During a dinner invitation, Peter casually steered the conversation until Ken unknowingly spoke the password. Peter recorded everything with a hidden pen mic, then handed it over to Neil. Neil then swiped the secretary's access card, the only other one that could open the door. While Ken and his assistant were in a meeting, Neil went upstairs, swiped the card, and played back the recorded password. The lock clicked open. Success. With no time to search manually, Neil installed a scanner in the shredder so the FBI could reconstruct every document Ken destroyed. When Jessica pressed for updates, Neil reassured her that he and Peter had a plan. She just needed to stay patient. From the shredded documents, Peter and Neil pieced together the full story. Beginner had never created the gem processor at all. It was a fabricated claim to scam the Department of Defense into signing a massive deal. Once the contract was secured, Ken killed the engineer and staged a theft to cover his tracks. That way, Beginner kept the contract and bought time to actually build the fake tech they claimed to have. Peter and Neil decided to set a trap to make Ken expose himself. Neil mentioned Mozzie's theory, and Peter finally admitted the real music box was in his possession. He promised they'd pursue the truth about Kate's plane together, but only if they followed his lead. The operation began. Peter met with Ken, claiming the audit was complete, but that Jessica, the deceased engineer's girlfriend, had reached out wanting to reveal something about him. At the mention of Jessica's name, Ken visibly tensed. Meanwhile, Neil escorted Jessica out of the company, preparing to take her to a safe house. They both knew once Peter spoke Jessica's name, Ken would come after her next. Just then, Neil noticed a recorder in Jessica's purse, containing Ken's voice password. That meant she had taken Peter's recording pen and broken into Ken's office herself. Alarmed, Neil demanded an explanation. Jessica confessed everything. Ken was the one who killed her boyfriend. Driven by revenge, she had poisoned the wine in Ken's office. Neil was stunned. At that very moment, Peter was with Ken, and both suddenly began struggling to breathe. Neil rushed back to beginner headquarters, but the guards blocked him from entering the top floor. Desperate, he forced his way into the elevator. With no keycard access, Neil ripped open the control panel and hotwired it manually. Meanwhile, Peter and Ken were barely conscious. Gasping, Peter told him, "Stop pretending, Ken, this poison is the same that killed the engineer. How long before it's too late?" Ken finally admitted the engineer had died about 20 minutes after being poisoned. By the time Neil burst in, Peter was collapsing. Thankfully, he'd called an ambulance en route, and the medics arrived in time to inject a cardiac stimulant, saving them both. When Ken regained consciousness, he finally realized Peter was FBI and that every word he'd spoken had been recorded. With irrefutable evidence, Ken was charged with murder and federal contract fraud. After a few days' rest, Peter recovered. One evening, he visited Neil's apartment, carrying the mysterious music box. Neil produced the key, and together, they finally opened the box that had caused so much chaos. A plain-looking man sat quietly on a park bench, enjoying a peaceful moment. A hitman approached silently from behind. Neil's closest friend, Mozzie, the eccentric genius, fell to the ground amidst the crowd. Time rewound to the day before. When Peter and Neil first opened the box, all they found was a Mozart composition, no hidden data, no secret code. Unable to decipher it, they turned to Mozzie, their resident know-it-all. Mozzie theorized the melody might hide an audio frequency, perhaps translating into numeric or geographic coordinates. Peter allowed Mozzie to record the tune, but insisted the box itself remain under FBI custody. Despite his efforts, Mozzie couldn't decode it. Then Neil remembered the box had once been stolen by Alex, his old partner in crime. She must have opened it before. Alex had been relocated to Italy under FBI protection, but Neil knew a way to lure her out. Meanwhile, Peter and Diana continued the search. They found that former FBI agent Fowler, tied to the explosion, had vanished. Diana discovered Fowler had withdrawn his last $200 2 days earlier, meaning he was broke and desperate. She posed as an insurance agent, claiming the company was finally releasing his late wife's settlement if he came in person to collect it. To keep it safe, Diana locked the music box in her home safe. Meanwhile, Neil and Mozzie set their own plan in motion to draw Alex out. They met an old contact, Tomas, a veteran artifact dealer. Tomas revealed the police were investigating a smuggling ring involving antique artifacts, one of which Alex had recently traded to cover her tracks. Several items had mysteriously vanished, convincing Neil that Alex had secretly returned to New York to destroy evidence. Tomas had one remaining artifact from the batch, the very one Alex would likely come for. Neil immediately came up with a plan. He told Tomas to spread word in the underworld that the last remaining artifact was hidden somewhere in the city, a perfect bait. Recently, the FBI hadn't had any major cases, leaving Peter with nothing to do, and the ever-rigid agent certainly wouldn't break protocol to help Neil investigate Alex. So Neil and Mozzie stayed up late forging an old case file about a long-forgotten antique theft. They painstakingly mimicked FBI formatting, stamps, and signatures, making the file look exactly like an unresolved case from years ago. Neil knew Peter too well. When bored, he always reopened cold cases, and nothing piqued Peter's interest more than stolen art. Sure enough, their fabricated antique theft landed right on Peter's desk, and since the police happened to be probing a similar case, he was instantly hooked. Neil had deliberately included a note about one last surviving artifact. Peter noticed nearly every item in the case had gone missing except one, and quickly devised a plan. He ordered agents to stake out whoever possessed the item, certain the thief would return to reclaim it. That item was in Tomas's possession. Neil wanted to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, use the FBI's surveillance to lure Alex into the open. Meanwhile, Diana brought good news. Their plan worked. Fowler, the long-missing ex-agent, had shown up to collect his insurance payout. Security cameras captured his face. Mozzie, nearly mad with frustration, despite all his efforts, he still couldn't decipher the music box's secret. Neil told him to take a break. Once Alex showed up, they'd finally get answers. But Mozzie had a backup plan. He knew a Japanese antiquities expert, someone Neil also knew, and planned to consult him. Peter led the surveillance team on the artifact location, while Diana reviewed security footage. She traced Fowler to a motel under an alias, but he'd left right after collecting the money. Records showed Fowler had purchased materials used in explosives, proving the blast that killed Kate might indeed be his doing. That night, Alex showed up near the safe house where the artifact was kept. As she scouted the perimeter, Neil stepped out from the shadows. Startled, she realized this had all been a setup for Neil to find her. Neil calmly assured her he'd never betray her. The police might be closing in, but the artifact was safe with Tomas, and he'd make sure it stayed that way. He asked about the music box's secret, but Alex insisted she hadn't taken anything from it. So Neil moved to Phase 2, stealing the box from Peter. He told Alex to retrieve it from Diana's home safe. Meanwhile, Neil returned to the command van, trying to distract Peter and Diana long enough for Alex to act. Unfortunately, Diana suddenly left early, making Neil nervous. Peter stopped him from leaving, saying he was done keeping secrets. Peter revealed the full truth: the bomb that killed Kate was most likely made by Fowler. Meanwhile, Alex had broken into Diana's home. The safe posed no challenge. Within minutes, she retrieved the music box. Just then, Diana returned. Hearing a noise, she rushed to the window, but Alex had already leapt out and vanished into the night. Upon checking, Diana found the box gone. Peter didn't need to guess, he knew Neil was behind it. Neil denied everything, unwilling to admit the truth. He intended to use the music box to get revenge on Fowler. Peter was furious, but soon after, the news broke: someone had anonymously donated the music box to the Heritage Museum. It turned out the box was a Russian artifact. That weekend, it would be displayed publicly before being sent back to St. Petersburg. Peter instantly knew this was Neil's doing. He called Agent Hughes to discuss the matter. Of course, Neil denied everything, but Peter knew him far too well. After the music box's exhibition in New York, it would be sent back to Russia, never to be seen again. If Fowler read the news, this would be his final chance to claim it. Neil knew it too. He was using the event as bait to draw Fowler out and avenge Kate's death. Peter warned him not to act on impulse, that justice must follow the law, but clearly, Neil wasn't listening. Meanwhile, Mozzie brought the music sheet to a Japanese expert, who was instantly fascinated by its mystery. Neil soon arrived at the shop. Peter had been right. Neil was planning to lure Fowler out and shoot him. Mozzie tried to talk him out of it, but the expert, growing excited, announced he could decode the melody. Neil told Mozzie to stay and work with the expert, then report back later. Spotting a pistol in the man's drawer, Neil hesitated briefly, then took it. The day of the exhibition arrived. Diana monitored the museum from outside, ready to arrest anyone, Fowler or Neil, who showed up. They believed Neil was still home. His anklet signal was active, but didn't know he'd unlocked it earlier. Once freed from the tracker, Neil was finally unbound. Not long after, Fowler arrived at the museum. Peter followed close behind. Ever cautious, Fowler realized he was being tailed and bolted upstairs. The upper floor was under renovation, empty and echoing. Fowler dashed into a maintenance room and barricaded the door behind him. Mozzie and the Japanese expert finally uncovered the box's secret. Mozzie hurried to tell Neil, but he wasn't home. The tracking anklet was strapped to his dog's neck. By then, Neil was already at the museum, smoothly tossing the gun past security without setting off any alarms. Diana spotted him on CCTV and alerted Peter, rushing inside to stop Neil before it was too late. Neil searched the museum until he spotted Fowler hiding in a room. Without hesitation, he sprinted up to the opposite balcony, grabbed the hanging banner, and swung across. Diana shouted for him to stop, saying backup was on the way, but Neil had made up his mind. He needed to face Fowler himself. With a mid-air twist, Neil crashed through the glass and landed in the room. Peter could only watch in horror. Neil aimed the gun at Fowler. "Why did you kill her?" Fowler shouted back, furious. "That damn music box cost me my wife and my career. You really think I killed your girlfriend?" The words shook Neil's resolve. Just then, Peter and the agents broke in, urging Neil to stay calm, not to throw his life away. Conflicted and broken, Neil didn't know what to believe. In the end, he trusted Peter, lowered his gun, and surrendered Fowler to the FBI. Exhausted from years on the run, Fowler told them everything. Years ago, his wife had been murdered. In desperation, he received a call from an unknown number promising to help him find the killer. At the time, Fowler had been just like Neil, consumed by vengeance. With intel from the caller, he tracked down and killed the culprit, but the act was recorded and he was blackmailed into servitude. Since then, Fowler suspected the mysterious caller had orchestrated his wife's death. The caller forced Fowler, through his FBI position, to conduct illegal operations, especially the hunt for the music box. They never met in person, all communication was by phone. The mysterious man, Fowler said, was part of a powerful organization called the Directive, pulling strings behind the scenes. As it turned out, Kate hadn't been killed by Fowler. She had asked him to make the bomb herself, planning to fake her death and run away with Neil. Yet Fowler didn't know why the bomb had gone off prematurely. Neil had a recording of Kate's last call, but Fowler swore she wasn't talking to him. Neil and Peter had hoped capturing Fowler would bring clarity, but the true mastermind remained shrouded in shadow. Afterward, Peter fitted Neil with a new tracking anklet and told him to go home and rest. The revelation shattered Neil completely. After all this time investigating, every lead had vanished. It seemed the music box was the only thing that could still reveal the truth. Fowler admitted he had met a hitman connected to the mysterious figure only once, a former Special Forces soldier. Years ago, under the guidance of the unknown mastermind, Fowler had reached out to this man. It was the only useful lead he had. Just then, Diana burst in. NYPD had just reported that a Japanese antique dealer had been murdered. Surveillance footage showed Mozzie and Neil at the shop. Peter rushed to the scene. The shop owner lay dead behind the counter, 2 bullets in his chest. The haunting tune from the music box still played softly. Peter quickly deduced that Neil and Mozzie had sought the man's help decoding the box, and according to his notes, they had likely succeeded. He feared the knowledge had cost the man his life. If that were true, Neil and Mozzie would be the next targets. When Peter and Diana stormed Neil's apartment, he was saying goodbye to Alex, who was preparing to go into hiding again after explaining her motives. Peter quickly noticed Mozzie's absence, which alarmed them both. As they headed downstairs, the assassin Fowler had described appeared. A single shot rang out. Mozzie was hit and collapsed on the street. The man who could do anything had fallen, plunging Neil into a nightmare. A month later, Neil teamed up with Peter and the FBI to set a flawless trap to expose the smuggling network tied to the hitman. Their target, a self-proclaimed Nigerian prince laundering money through offshore trades. Agent Jones posed as a maintenance worker fixing a payphone, while Diana approached the prince, warning him that his operations were under federal scrutiny. Nearby, Neil signaled Mozzie to activate the signal jammer from his wheelchair. But things went sideways. A passerby tried to use the very payphone meant for the target. They needed him gone. Peter's wife, Elizabeth, cleverly called and charmed the man into leaving to buy a gift for his girlfriend. Once the coast was clear, Mozzie signaled Diana, who withdrew smoothly, pretending her task was done. However, something Diana said made the prince uneasy. He called the assassin, but with cell service jammed, he had to use the payphone. The call was rerouted straight to Neil, who used a voice modulator to mimic the assassin. The assassin arranged a meeting to collect the goods, and the prince unwittingly revealed the location of his smuggled cargo. The plan worked flawlessly. Flashback to a month earlier, immediately after the shooting, Peter and Neil rushed Mozzie to the best hospital in New York. After hours of surgery, Mozzie survived, but remained in a coma. Neil and Peter swore to hunt down the killer and avenge their friend. They soon discovered all records about the hitman were fake. Knowing he tried to flee, Peter used FBI authority to seal every exit out of New York. To escape, the assassin would need a new identity, and Neil knew every forger in town. He sent urgent word to every forger he'd ever worked with, forming a temporary alliance. Everyone respected Mozzie, so by the next afternoon, they made a pact. If the assassin contacted any of them, Neil would be notified instantly. A few days later, Mozzie woke up. The bullet had missed his heart by mere millimeters. He was incredibly lucky. Though there was still no trace of the hitman, Peter reassured Neil that New York was now a steel cage. There was no way the guy could fly out of it. Yet, the moment Peter hung up, the hitman appeared right behind Neil. But Neil's instincts were sharper than most. He sensed the danger and lunged to take the man down. However, the assassin was a trained ex-Special Forces soldier. Neil didn't stand a chance. Within seconds, he was overpowered. The hitman claimed he wasn't there to kill Neil. He wanted a deal. In exchange for his safety, he'd expose the mastermind behind Mozzie's shooting and Kate's death. Neil immediately went to Peter. It was clear the assassin had run out of options. If he were still loyal to his employer, Neil would already be dead. Neil trusted Peter completely. Together, they would catch the hitman and unmask whoever was pulling the strings. The next day, as both men returned to work, Mozzie was recovering well. Spirits were finally lifting. Then Peter noticed his favorite coffee mug was missing. He assumed Neil had hidden it as a prank. Diana then brought good news. The hitman, impatient for a response, had approached a document forger. The forger immediately tipped off the FBI and gave them his address. While the man was calmly trimming his hedges, Peter and his team stormed in and arrested him on the spot. During the search, they found the weapon used in the shooting, witnesses, evidence, everything seemed solid. Yet during interrogation, the assassin denied everything, claiming they had the wrong man. Things got stranger when the forensic chief reported the gun barrel was misaligned, the prints wiped clean, except for one clear fingerprint inside the weapon. The fingerprint analysis came back, it was Peter's, perfectly clear, undeniable. The Department of Justice suspected Peter had planted the gun to frame the suspect. Peter was stunned, speechless. He was forced to surrender his weapon and badge, suspended pending investigation. With no solid proof, the assassin was released. Everything happened too fast for Peter and Neil to react. Back home, they pieced it together. How could Peter's print end up on the gun? The assassin must have stolen something bearing his fingerprints. Then Peter remembered the missing coffee mug. Could the hitman really have infiltrated FBI headquarters just to steal it? He ordered Jones and Diana to pull the surveillance footage, and there it was. The hitman had disguised himself as Neil and broken into the office the night before. When he left, Peter's mug was in his hand. Jones also noticed Peter's computer monitor light up, meaning the assassin had accessed his workstation. Even with Peter suspended, Jones and Diana secretly continued working with him. They found that the hitman had used a guard's keycard to enter at midnight. Surveillance mistook him for Neil. He wore the same hat Neil usually did, so no alarms were raised. The assassin wiped the system logs, but Peter had secretly installed keystroke tracking software, an old precaution against Neil's mischief. The software revealed that the hitman had deleted the name Nigerian Prince from a file. That man owned several international shipping companies. It turned out the assassin, under the alias Clausen, had rented one of the prince's luxury yachts. Peter and Neil decided to dig into their connection. Access to the yacht club was restricted to elite members. Sarah, who worked at the insurance firm that underwrote them, helped Peter and Neil get inside. Peter soon learned that the prince was passionate about horse racing, a field he knew well. Posing as a potential investor, Peter easily struck up a friendly conversation. Meanwhile, Neil followed the plan, digging through the list of clients who had rented the prince's yachts. So Neil and Sarah posed as a married couple, claiming they wanted to rent a yacht for a private sea trip. But the captain glanced at the list and said every yacht had already been rented. While Sarah distracted him with small talk, Neil swiftly snapped photos of the rental list. Later, the three regrouped. With his years of FBI experience, Peter immediately sensed something off about the prince. He was likely facilitating smuggling operations. Neil added his discovery. Every time the hitman came to New York, he rented a yacht under the alias Clausen. That meant the hitman had partnered with the prince multiple times, using his ships to move contraband overseas. This time would be no different, otherwise, he wouldn't have risked sneaking into the FBI to erase his trail. So Peter and Neil devised a trap that would make the prince incriminate himself. Since Peter was suspended and couldn't use FBI equipment, they turned to Sarah for help. Neil needed her voice modulator. Jones and Diana pulled an old interrogation recording of the hitman's voice. It wasn't much, but enough to fake a convincing call to the prince. The FBI and Neil's criminal mastermind team joined forces, finalizing every detail. Mozzie, freshly discharged from the hospital, was there too, of course. The goal? Scare the prince into contacting the hitman himself. Diana's job was to stall the prince. Jones handled the payphone setup, and Mozzie managed the signal jammer. Everything was in place, and the earlier scene played out perfectly. The prince was terrified. His call to the hitman was intercepted by Peter, but the prince didn't notice. He set up a meeting to deliver the goods, saying it'd be his last job. When the prince arrived at the meeting spot, the only one waiting was Neil. By the time the prince realized he'd been played, the FBI had surrounded the area. Peter and Neil pried open the crates and froze. Inside was a Nazi silver dinner set from the 1940s. Smuggling this? Why? Peter asked. The prince insisted he only leased his ships. He never asked what they carried. Under FBI surveillance, the prince phoned the hitman, claiming Fowler had found him and urging him to retrieve the cargo immediately. Hearing that Peter was still pursuing him despite suspension, the hitman vowed to take him down once and for all. Peter quickly contacted Sarah, asking her to pose as an insurance client for the prince, reporting that agent Peter Burke was harassing him. Sarah went straight to FBI headquarters, meeting the bureau chief and DOJ officials to file the complaint, claiming Peter was abusing his position. Acting on her report, the DOJ and FBI rushed to the given address, only to find the hitman and the prince actually conducting a deal. The hitman didn't have time to wipe the fingerprints, and Peter was fully cleared of suspicion. Still suspended, Peter couldn't take part in the arrest. He could only watch from afar as the team executed their plan flawlessly. During interrogation, the hitman refused to reveal why he was smuggling Nazi-era artifacts. Peter believed the orders had come directly from the mastermind behind everything. Records showed the shipment was bound for Argentina. Coincidentally, Sarah's insurance company had operations there. Sarah decided to travel there herself to oversee the transfer and dig deeper into its origins. Meanwhile, Mozzie and the late Japanese antique dealer had already cracked the music box, the notes translated into mathematical equations, forming a detailed blueprint. When Neil saw the blueprint, he froze. It was something he recognized instantly. At the same time, Peter pressed the hitman harder, realizing the mastermind would soon silence him. The assassin agreed to a deal, protection in exchange for a name. Finally, he spoke, and everyone froze. The mastermind was none other than Vincent, Neil's former mentor. The art of card switching, a classic street con, the man performing it was Mozzie himself, back when he was still a small-time hustler. That was 8 years ago. Neil, new to New York back then, saw Mozzie lose to a bald grifter, but one glance told him they were partners in the con. Mozzie pretended to be furious, throwing down his cards and taunting Neil, "Think you can do better, then step up." He kept pushing Neil to bet bigger. Neil pushed in his last $500, even the bald man, and Mozzie himself watched nervously. After a few slick card switches, the bald man gestured for Neil to pick the card closest to him. Mozzie frowned. He knew it was a trap. But Neil was faster. He flipped his card spot on. After Neil left, Mozzie noticed something odd. Neil had swapped their cards right under their noses. Neil walked away with $1,000. Moments later, there was a knock. It was Mozzie. Neil tried to shut him out, but Mozzie said he wasn't after the money, he wanted to talk. Mozzie sensed Neil was something special, and that's how the most brilliant con artist duo in New York began. Flash forward to 8 years later. FBI agent Peter made a shocking discovery. Vincent, the elusive mastermind, was actually Neil's former mentor. He brought a few bottles of wine to Neil's place, determined to hear the whole story. 7 years earlier, Vincent had built the largest Ponzi scheme in the country, with Neil as his prodigy. Vincent disappeared after pocketing hundreds of millions. Now, he had resurfaced to face his former students. Peter swore he'd bring him down this time. Neil, however, had a more personal motive. Vincent was tied to Kate's death, and somehow to Alex as well. To truly understand Vincent, you had to start with Mozzie. He and the Japanese shop owner had decoded the music box, a blueprint identical to one Vincent always carried. Neil told Peter how they met. Mozzie had grown up in Detroit, joined street gangs, and found his talent in cons and schemes. 8 years ago, Neil had just forged his first batch of Atlantic Bank bonds. Mozzie, ever ambitious, dreamed of pulling off the perfect con, a national headline, and his target was Vincent, then at the height of his success. That was when Neil's path crossed with Vincent's. Neil asked Peter half-jokingly if chasing him for 4 years had stirred up the bureau. Back then, Peter was an elite agent who didn't waste time on small-time scams, but the Atlantic bond forgeries were too perfect to ignore. He didn't know who did it, but he secretly admired the artist behind such flawless forgeries. Neil grinned smugly, making Peter instantly regret admitting it. Mozzie had been studying Vincent for 6 months. At the time, Vincent was the CEO of a renowned financial firm, about to go public. Every tiny detail decides success or failure. You have to know your marks, every move, every thought. Vincent routinely transferred company profits to an account in the Cayman Islands every 6 months. Mozzie planned to reroute that transfer into their account. Neil thought it impossible, but Mozzie already had a plan. With over a month to prepare, he wanted Neil to infiltrate Vincent's firm as a new hire and earn his trust as a reliable assistant. That Friday, Vincent was hosting a charity gala on antique restoration, the perfect opportunity, but tickets cost $5,000 apiece. So Neil went to Atlantic Bank, cashed in his forged bonds, and the staff suspected nothing. Peter happened to be at the bank investigating the same fraud. Neil overheard the conversation and, against Mozzie's warnings, walked right up to Peter. Peter had no idea the charming young man before him was the very fugitive he'd been chasing for years. Neil subtly fished out some intel and handed Peter a lollipop before leaving, a trademark move. That was their very first meeting. Mozzie thought Neil was insane, but Neil felt it was worth it. He now knew Peter's name. For the gala, Neil picked a fake name, Nick Halden, a name he instantly loved. That name would later become legendary in the con world. At the gala, Neil tried to impress Vincent with sharp talk about stocks and funds, but surrounded by elites, he barely stood out. Refusing to give up, Neil noticed Vincent admiring a painting and jumped in with a brilliant analysis, enough to make Vincent turn his head. That was also the moment Neil met Kate, the woman who left him speechless at first sight. Smooth-talking and confident, Neil suddenly stumbled over his words in front of her. For once, the con man was caught off guard. Unfortunately, Kate already had a boyfriend, which left Neil heartbroken. Neil then switched the name cards at the dinner table so he could sit next to Vincent. Vincent immediately saw through him and gave him 1 minute to impress him. Neil calmly laid out his rival's next moves, backing his analysis with sharp logic, enough to pique Vincent's interest. Before leaving, Neil handed Vincent his business card and said, "If I'm right, I hope you'll consider hiring me." Neil turned out to be right. Peter later learned that within just 2 months, Neil had become Vincent's most trusted assistant. Around that time, Neil was hopelessly in love with Kate. Every time he looked into her soft blue eyes, he felt trapped in a spell he couldn't escape. The tension between them grew undeniable, and Kate clearly felt the same way. Then one sunny day, Kate dropped a bomb. She was moving to Chicago with her boyfriend. Neil's heart sank into despair. The symbol decoded from the music box turned out to be something Vincent always carried with him. Back then, Neil didn't understand what it meant, and even 8 years later, he still hadn't figured it out. Neil often helped Vincent analyze rivals and expose con artists who tried to scam him. One day, Neil spotted a woman pretending to discuss business but clearly eyeing Vincent's art collection. That woman was Alex, the one who would later become both his partner and ex-lover. Vincent exposed her intentions on the spot, and Neil, with his sharp instincts, quickly understood what was going on. Impressed by Neil's loyalty, Vincent wrote him a $50,000 check as a reward. To deepen that trust, Neil invested not only the check but his entire savings into Vincent's company. Vincent paid dividends on time, making Neil, Kate, and the other employees believe in him completely. Even Neil, the criminal genius, failed to see that Vincent was running a masterful Ponzi scheme. After Neil exposed her, Alex didn't leave. Instead, she grew curious about him. Seeing Kate back with her boyfriend, Neil, heartbroken, found comfort in Alex's company. With her streetwise instincts, Alex knew Neil wasn't just another employee, he had a bigger plan. Still, she didn't care. Her next target was the mysterious music box, worth a fortune in the underworld. At that time, the music box was in Copenhagen. Alex invited Neil to join her, if he was interested. Neil had been undercover beside Vincent for 4 months with no progress, which made Mozzie anxious. Then one night, there was a knock on the door. Kate had come back. She confessed her heart belonged to Neil and broke up with her boyfriend. Neil was overwhelmed, like a man reborn. He and Mozzie already had Vincent's bank details, they just needed the password. Neil told Vincent that his Cayman account might have been hacked and needed urgent verification. At that very moment, Neil noticed that the bank clerk who'd helped him had published his sketch in the newspaper. To his relief, Vincent trusted him completely and suspected nothing. As soon as Vincent left, Neil grabbed the paper and hid it, praying he hadn't seen it. Yet Neil couldn't bring himself to move the money. He loved Kate too much. If she ever learned that Nick Halden was a lie, he'd lose her forever. Mozzie was furious. After half a year of scheming, victory was within reach, and Neil was backing out. Still, Mozzie stayed optimistic. He believed Neil's talent would always find another mark. Neil and Kate enjoyed a brief period of happiness, until the news hit. Vincent had vanished, taking every investor's money with him. It was then that Neil finally realized Vincent was a true master con artist, the best of the best. Later, Neil managed to crack the banking password Vincent had given him, something no one else could have done. But Vincent already knew who Neil truly was. When he vanished, both Neil and Kate lost everything. In despair, Neil found the courage to confess to Kate that he was nothing more than a con man. Meanwhile, Mozzie hid inside an art gallery surrounded by priceless pieces. 2 police officers, Neil and Kate, showed up pretending to be cops. The guard believed them and handed over an evidence tag. Neil filled out a fake receipt, telling the guard he'd reclaim it from the station in 3 days. The guard nodded, none the wiser. Their lives seemed peaceful, until Neil remembered the music box Alex had mentioned. Around that time, Peter started tailing him. So Neil decided to flee with Kate to Copenhagen, planning to work with Alex to retrieve the music box. But Kate found the origami crane Alex had left behind and realized Neil had been secretly working with her. She couldn't accept it, and the two argued bitterly. In the end, Neil went to Copenhagen alone. Kate refused to follow. The mission failed completely. When Neil returned to New York, Kate was gone, probably out of anger and betrayal. He searched everywhere in vain, growing more obsessed by the day. For the next 3 years, Neil pulled off con after con, driving the FBI insane. Peter swore he wouldn't rest until Neil was caught. Then rookie agent Diana had an idea. Neil's ex-girlfriend Kate kept moving from place to place, even years after their breakup. Peter deduced that Kate's constant moves meant Neil was searching for her, and she didn't want to be found. So Peter devised a plan to lure Neil out. Sure enough, Neil was actively looking for her. Mozzie brought some news about Kate but warned Neil it sounded too convenient, probably a trap. Blinded by longing, Neil took the risk anyway. At last, he found Kate. After 2 years apart, they reunited. Neil was overjoyed and apologized sincerely. Yet when Kate asked how he'd found her, Neil suddenly sensed something was wrong. And right then, the FBI stormed in. It had all been Peter's setup. After years of pursuit, Peter finally had him. Neil simply smiled, shook his hand, and said, "Thank you, without you, I'd have never found her." Jones stepped forward to cuff him. Their reunion ended as quickly as it began. That night, Peter finally understood Neil's past. Neil returned to the mystery of Vincent. The decoded diagram from the music box turned out to be a waveform, a distress frequency. If built into an antenna and tuned to the right radio, it could locate a missing ship, a plane, or some lost treasure from the 1940s. Whatever it was, it had to be priceless, and they had to find it before Vincent did. Suddenly, white smoke puffed out from Mozzie's jacket, catching Peter's curiosity and leading to their next case. It began when the Deputy Secretary of State announced that an American student named Chris had been arrested in Myanmar. He was accused of stealing a ruby and smuggling it out of the country. But intelligence reports suggested Chris was innocent. The real thief was someone else. The State Department didn't want a public scandal, so they quietly enlisted Peter and Neil. The ruby was stored deep within a military base in Myanmar, virtually impossible to reach. Neil had heard of the gem before. He knew it could only be stolen with inside help. To clear Chris's name, they needed to recover the real ruby. Peter, Neil, Diana, and Jones began scanning FBI records for criminals who had recently traveled to Myanmar. For their first move, Peter and Neil went to the Myanmar embassy, posing as officials checking on Chris's well-being, but really, to sniff out leads. The ambassador said coldly, "We're under no obligation to cooperate, but to show goodwill between our nations, we can provide Chris's confession video, so you'll stop wasting your time." Peter and Neil felt hopeless. Chris's execution was scheduled in just a week. Time was running out. In the video, Chris confessed to losing the ruby, but it was clear he'd been coerced. The footage was heavily edited. Only Chris's face was visible, nothing around him, proof the video had been doctored. With a forced confession on record, the FBI was cornered. Every piece of evidence favored Myanmar. Adam appeared calm, but Peter sensed something deeper. Why would a high-ranking official care so much about a minor case? Finally, Adam confessed Chris was his son. Their relationship was strained, but if Myanmar learned Chris was his son, the case would spiral out of control. That's why Adam had secretly turned to Peter and Neil. This had to stay off the books. Peter tried enlarging the footage but could barely make out Chris's subtle hand movements. Diana, the daughter of a diplomat, realized what was happening. Kids of diplomats, she said, are trained to send distress signals through body language. Their top priority was to retrieve the original video, to decode whatever message Chris was trying to send. Neil went to see Mozzie, who was sulking with a drink in hand. Apparently, Neil had tricked him earlier during the pigeon blood ruby appraisal. Mozzie was furious that Neil had gone to his rival instead of consulting him, the actual gem expert. Neil hurried to explain that Randy, the rival, had just received a shipment containing a few real pigeon blood rubies, which made him the perfect lead. After hearing that, Mozzie finally calmed down. Randy owned a jewelry shop and occasionally dealt in lost goods. Neil had met him before under a fake identity. This time, he and Peter posed as brothers-in-law shopping for a gift. Having been tipped off, Randy had a few pieces ready, including a stunning ruby necklace. He boasted it was once owned by Indian royalty, calling the ruby a flower of blood-red perfection. But Neil immediately noticed something off. The necklace was antique, but the ruby was freshly cut, likely sliced from the missing pigeon blood ruby. Peter revealed his badge and demanded answers. Randy admitted he'd bought it from a mysterious man who claimed he had to cut the ruby into pieces. It was too valuable to sell whole. Peter and Neil devised a plan: create a flawless fake ruby and leak news of it hitting the black market to flush the real thief out. Peter arranged an official ruby exhibition to showcase Neil's counterfeit gem. The smuggler wouldn't be able to resist showing up. Mozzie took charge of creating the fake. Using a hydroxy torch at extreme heat, he grew a synthetic ruby in just 6 hours. Once cooled and polished, it was indistinguishable from the real one, unless examined under a high-powered lens. He even tapped it lightly with a hammer to add natural fracture lines. Pure genius. With her grace and elegance, Diana became the undercover jewel model. Wearing the fake ruby, she instantly caught the eye of a young man in the crowd. Randy immediately recognized him as the same man who'd sold him the ruby fragment. Neil approached, pretending to claim the gem was his. The man grew wary, assuming Neil was a rival buyer. Neil invited him to the basement for a private talk. The moment they got there, the FBI pounced and arrested him on the spot. The smuggler quickly confessed he'd bribed senior Myanmar military officials to help him smuggle the ruby out. When Peter showed him Chris's photo, he insisted he'd never seen the boy before. That was enough for Peter to know Chris was innocent. He immediately escorted the smuggler to the Myanmar embassy to clear Chris's name. Adam was already waiting at the FBI headquarters. Once the real thief was brought in, his son would be freed. But Diana brought bad news. The Myanmar ambassador had summoned Peter. Peter had a bad feeling, and he was right. The smuggler had changed his story entirely. He now claimed that Chris was the mastermind, and he was merely following orders. He said his earlier confession at the FBI was made under duress, that he wasn't in his right mind. Furious, Peter demanded the man be taken back for re-interrogation. The ambassador refused. The embassy was sovereign territory. The FBI had no jurisdiction there. Peter and Neil immediately realized the smuggler had struck a deal with the ambassador. It was clear Myanmar's government was determined to frame Chris. He must have known something dangerous. Thanks to her father's diplomatic connections, Diana managed to obtain the original interrogation footage. In the video, Chris pretended to scratch himself, subtly pointing to different spots on his body. After analysis, they realized he was signaling letters that spelled out his girlfriend's nickname. The team immediately brought her in. She revealed Chris had gone to Myanmar to investigate a rebel movement. He had sent her an encrypted hard drive, but that morning, her home had been broken into and it was stolen. All that remained was a video call recording between them. In the clip, Chris was seen with a group of rebel fighters. At last, Peter pieced it all together. The Myanmar government discovered Chris had filmed the rebels. Fearing international backlash, they framed him for stealing the ruby to silence him. The stolen drive contained data on rebel locations and identities, information too valuable to lose. It was obvious now, the ambassador had sent agents to retrieve the drive. Peter and Neil rushed to the embassy, just as the ambassador's assistant stepped out of a car. Peter ordered his team to search him, but found nothing. The drive was hidden inside the diplomatic pouch carried by the female assistant. Unfortunately, diplomatic pouches were immune to search. FBI's hands were tied. They could only watch helplessly as she walked away with it. Later, Adam arranged a private meeting with Neil. That's when Neil realized Adam hadn't chosen him for the case, he'd chosen him for who he used to be. Adam didn't order him as a deputy secretary, but pleaded as a father, begging Neil to steal back the hard drive to save his son. Remembering his own father, Neil was overwhelmed and decided to take the risk. Meanwhile, Peter and Diana discussed at HQ. Suddenly, Peter realized Adam was using Neil to handle this off the record. Neil and Mozzie devised a plan. They knew the ambassador couldn't decrypt the drive, he'd send it home for decoding. That explained why Chris hadn't been executed yet. They still needed the password. Neil found her flight details. She was personally transporting the pouch back to Myanmar. He and Mozzie built a special box containing the synthetic ruby. When sealed, it would release smoke after a short delay. All they had to do was make sure it didn't go off inside the embassy. Just then, a knock at the door. Peter arrived. He already knew what Neil was planning. The ruby box started smoking right then. Peter realized Neil had struck a deal with Adam. He warned him to stop. Failure could cause an international incident. If Neil got caught by Myanmar authorities, the FBI wouldn't be able to save him. Neil knew Peter's concern was genuine, but seeing Adam's desperate eyes as a father, he couldn't turn away. As expected, the ambassador couldn't crack the drive and handed it to his assistant for transport. Knowing her schedule, Neil waited at the embassy gate. He greeted her, saying, "The FBI would like to return part of the pigeon blood ruby to you." The assistant smiled, saying she'd inform the ambassador immediately. Meanwhile, Diana checked the GPS tracker and saw Neil's anklet signal right outside the embassy. Peter panicked. He knew Neil was about to do something reckless and couldn't just stand by. This time, he chose not to play by the rules. He headed straight to the embassy to keep Neil safe. The ambassador personally appeared with his assistant to thank Neil. Neil grew anxious. Why hasn't the box gone off yet? The assistant was about to leave. Once the pouch was loaded into the diplomatic car, Neil would lose his only chance. Just then, Peter arrived. Neil didn't have time to explain. He only managed, "You've got to stall her." Peter strode forward and sternly claimed the car had multiple traffic violations that needed verification. The ambassador and his assistant, confused, played along to avoid a scene. Just as tempers began to rise, the box finally reacted. Thick white smoke poured from the diplomatic pouch. The assistant panicked. The pouch contained both the hard drive and the precious ruby. The ambassador, furious yet powerless, had no choice but to let the FBI inspect it. A few days later, Myanmar issued an official statement denying the existence of any military data drive. Fearing international fallout if the footage leaked, they agreed to release Chris. Neil was deeply moved watching Adam and Chris reunited. When Peter asked why he'd gone so far, Neil quietly admitted his father had been a corrupt cop. Peter was stunned. For the first time, he saw a side of Neil's past he'd never known. Before him lay an authentic engraving plate for a $100 bill. Neil's eyes lit up like a cat spotting fish. He examined every line in detail, trembling with fascination. Behind him, 3 FBI agents watched every move. For the first time ever, the master forger was face to face with a genuine printing plate. The FBI had allowed this viewing to help identify materials used in counterfeit operations. After examining it closely, Neil reluctantly handed it back. He was undercover inside a high-end counterfeiting ring. During his initiation, the boss handed him a stack of IDs and challenged him to spot the fake. For Neil, it was child's play. One glance and he had the answer. Impressed, the boss hired him on the spot. 2 days earlier, Neil was still enjoying free lodging at the elegant home of June, his wealthy and kind landlady. That day, an uninvited guest arrived, introducing himself as Ford. He claimed to have been a close associate of June's late husband. Much like Neil and Mozzie, the two men had once been partners in crime. Yet Neil sensed something dark beneath Ford's charm. After a tense exchange, Ford accidentally tossed Neil a coin and left. Neil brought the coin to Diana, asking her to run fingerprints and check Ford's record. The result shocked him. The prints didn't belong to Ford, but to a man named Gunn. Gunn was a notorious criminal involved in blackmail and extortion. Jones dug deeper and found that Gunn and Ford had been cellmates in prison. Both were now out of prison, but why didn't Ford's prints appear on the coin he'd handed over? The mystery gnawed at Neil. To protect June, Peter ordered surveillance on both men. Diana, tailing Gunn, saw him gathering a small crew. Something was brewing. When Neil got home, June was in his room, searching for an old photo album from over 20 years ago. It contained photos of her late husband and a younger Ford. June mentioned Ford had asked for one of her husband's old suits. She wasn't sure why. After she left, Neil's suspicions deepened. He checked the suit pocket and found a faded receipt. Neil realized this must be what Ford wanted. Just then, Ford knocked on the door. Neil knew he was after the receipt. Neil stayed on guard, ready for whatever game Ford was about to play. Ford kept insisting he and June's late husband had been partners, bound by loyalty and blood. He said June's husband was the famous face, while he was the man behind the curtain, the planner, the fixer, the cleanup crew. Ford emphasized their bond was unbreakable, subtly suggesting Neil had nothing to worry about. He meant no harm to June. Neil nodded politely, though half of him didn't believe a word. Just then, June entered warmly, inviting Neil, Peter, and the others to an impromptu dinner party that evening. Neil agreed with a calm smile, masking his unease. Later, he brought the old receipt to Mozzie for examination. The writing was almost illegible, but Mozzie promised to restore it. He suspected it held the key to Ford's real plan. Neil called Peter, relaying June's invitation and asking him to come with Elizabeth. That evening, Peter and Elizabeth arrived on time. Neil and Peter watched Ford closely, but he remained calm and composed, too calm. Upstairs, Mozzie called Neil with an update. He had dug deeper into Ford's background. It was true, Ford and June's husband had been a legendary con artist duo decades ago. Mozzie had also restored the receipt. It was from a furniture store. The record showed that before his death, June's husband had modified a desk, adding a hidden compartment. Whatever was hidden there was clearly what Ford was after. Meanwhile, Elizabeth asked to see June's old photo album. As she flipped through the pages, Ford suddenly grew nervous, subtly trying to stop her. Peter picked up on it instantly and played along, pretending to admire Ford's younger days to distract him. Yet after checking, they found nothing suspicious. Following Mozzie's clue, Neil located the desk and discovered the hidden compartment. Inside was a sample plate of counterfeit $100 bills. Just then, Ford entered, pretending to look for a record. Neil immediately sensed Ford knew what he was doing and had come to keep an eye on him. He politely ushered Ford out, then rushed downstairs to call Peter. When he returned, the printing plate was gone. Neil realized too late, he just helped Ford steal it. When they tried to pursue, Elizabeth said Ford had already taken a cab. Back in Neil's room, they confirmed the stolen plate was for the 1991 $100 bill design. That version lacked modern security features, making it far easier to replicate. Ford's plan was clear: mass-produce counterfeit bills using the old plate. To track his next move, they needed to find where he was sourcing his materials, especially the ink and paper. Neil was allowed to inspect the real $100 engraving plate to analyze the printing process. Most components were easy to get except the specialized ink and security paper. Tracing those would lead them straight to Ford. Meanwhile, Diana, tailing Gunn, spotted Ford meeting him in secret. She didn't move in, just followed and reported. Once captured, Ford confessed everything. He and June's husband had obtained the plate 10 years ago, planning one last job before retiring. But June's husband found peace in his new life and hid the plate away. Later, Ford was imprisoned on another charge. There, he met Gunn. Gunn learned about the plate and, after release, threatened to hurt June if Ford didn't hand it over. Ford claimed he acted only to protect June, stealing the plate first to keep it out of Gunn's hands. He said he'd given Neil the coin to redirect suspicion toward Gunn, hoping the FBI would stop him. Peter and Neil weren't sure whether to believe him. When asked why the coin had no prints, Ford smirked. "I've sanded mine off over the years," he said. The plate was now with Gunn, but they still had no evidence tying him directly to the crime. Peter decided to use Ford as an informant and plant Neil inside Gunn's operation to gather evidence. They arrested one of Gunn's men, Miro, bugged Ford, and sent him back inside. Ford introduced Neil to Gunn, boasting that he was 100 times better than Miro. Gunn was skeptical and decided to test him. Neil and Ford worked in perfect sync, giving nothing away. Gunn handed Neil a pile of IDs and told him to spot the fakes. For Neil, it was child's play. One glance and he nailed them all. Impressed, Gunn let them leave, saying he'd call when things were ready. With Neil now undercover, his tracking anklet was temporarily removed. According to Ford, Gunn's crew had everything ready except the ink and paper. The ink could be bought, but the paper was government regulated and nearly impossible to obtain. Without it, Gunn's grand plan would collapse. However, there were only a few government paper mills in New York, and no one knew which one Gunn would target. Peter recalled the fake IDs Neil had seen earlier. Those must be the aliases Gunn's crew was using. Neil effortlessly recited every alias from memory, leaving Peter astonished. His photographic mind never failed. While reviewing Miro's interrogation file, Neil noticed ink residue on the suspect's fingerprints. That could only mean one thing: Gunn had already acquired the ink. All that remained was tracking down the paper. The next morning, Diana traced the fake identities Neil remembered. She found the gang holed up in a motel right beside a government paper mill. That had to be their next target. Peter immediately contacted the Treasury Department to reinforce the mill's security. He told Neil to stay put in case Gunn made contact. Things took a turn. Ford and Gunn had vanished from FBI surveillance. Peter was baffled. Why would Ford, their informant, run? He called Treasury again, demanding tighter security. But the official told him all the 1991 paper stock had already been transported for safekeeping. Peter immediately ordered GPS tracking on the convoy and dispatched a response team. Just then, Neil's doorbell rang, and standing there was Gunn. Without a word, Gunn forced Neil to come with him. Mozzie saw everything and frantically called Peter. Gunn drove Neil to a road near the convoy's route. It was an ambush. He wanted Neil to identify which crates contained the 1991 paper. Moments later, the convoy arrived, but Peter's team hadn't yet caught up. Gunn ordered both ends blocked, then approached the truck driver with his men. The driver wasn't intimidated at first. His truck was bulletproof. Then Gunn pulled out a photo of his daughter. That did it. The driver surrendered instantly. Gunn forced the driver to open the truck. Now it was Neil's turn to locate the right paper. At that very moment, Peter's team sped toward the scene, just 1 minute too late. Gunn's crew had already grabbed several crates and vanished. Ford was waiting at a hidden base. While Gunn was away, Ford wrapped bundles of old newspapers, preparing to swap them with the fake cash later. As Gunn and Neil returned, Ford hid the crates and greeted them with a fake cheerful smile. Gunn drew his gun and ordered them to start printing immediately. For Neil and Ford, printing money was second nature. Within minutes, stacks of counterfeit $100 bills filled the table. Meanwhile, Peter and Mozzie were frantic, having lost track of Neil. Suddenly, Peter remembered how Ford had tried to stop him from flipping through June's photo album. Mozzie checked June's old photos and found one taken in front of a long-closed speakeasy. June had mentioned her husband and Ford once owned a secret bar there. It was still technically hers. Peter realized at once that's where the counterfeit operation was happening. Back at the hideout, Neil and Ford had finished printing over $1 million worth of fake cash. Suddenly, police sirens blared outside, Gunn's face drained of color. He rushed to the door while Ford flipped the switch, swapping the real counterfeit crate with his decoy full of newspapers. As the police car stopped out front, Gunn shouted at Ford, "You said this place was safe." While they argued, Neil quietly switched the crates back again. Neither of them noticed. In panic, Gunn grabbed his gun, took Ford hostage, and fled with the crate he thought was full of money. Ford believed Gunn had taken the decoy crate, smiling smugly, unaware of the truth. Neil finally pieced it together. Ford had staged a fake alarm across the street, drawing police to scare Gunn into running. The whole point was distraction. Ford wanted to keep the counterfeit cash for himself. From the moment he tricked Neil into checking the coin's fingerprints, everything had been part of Ford's plan. Gunn escaped through the basement but ran straight into Diana at the stairwell. Peter recovered several million in counterfeit bills. Gunn was done for. Yet Neil knew the truth, the crate was full of newspapers. He tried to reason with Ford, telling him to come clean and testify for a lighter sentence. Ford ignored him, clutching the crate as he slipped away. By the time Peter rushed in, Ford was gone, vanished through the tunnels. The underground network was a maze. The FBI hadn't prepared for it. Ford escaped, leaving Neil with a harsh lesson: greed always destroys. Once safely away, Ford opened the crate, only to find newspapers. His smug grin collapsed instantly. Neil had just outconned the con. The next scene shifted. Neil tapped a statue in the park, loosening a ring from its finger. 5 years earlier, he had hidden a $2.5 million antique ring by painting it the statue's color and mounting it on its hand. No one had noticed for years. Now, he retrieved it, for a reason: to save a kidnapped FBI agent. The captive was Matthew Keller, a criminal mastermind second only to Neil. Keller had always despised Neil. He'd lost to him once and ended up behind bars because of it. He'd been sentenced to 20 years and was now being transferred to a prison run by the mafia. Keller owed the mob $2.5 million. If he went there, he wouldn't last a day. So he reached out to the FBI, claiming he had intel on a terrorist group, his bargaining chip for survival. Peter told him the transfer order was final, there was no way to stop it. Keller then revealed a forger who was currently making fake passports for terrorists. If they followed that lead, they could expose the entire cell. The information was too big to ignore. Peter had to check it out. Records identified the forger as a photographer and one of Keller's former partners. That alone made Peter and Neil suspect a trap. Still, because it involved national security, they had no choice but to proceed. Peter and Neil went to the man's studio to confront him. Peter asked bluntly, "Are you making passports for terrorists?" The man's phone rang. He said he'd answer after the call. By the time Peter looked back, he had slipped out through a side door. Peter ordered Neil to block the front while he pursued through the back. As soon as he stepped into the alley, a gun was pressed to his head. It was a setup. Keller had orchestrated everything from prison to have Peter taken hostage. By the time Neil arrived, Peter was gone. All that remained was a dropped phone. Peter woke up in a basement, shackled to a reinforced cage with a digital lock. He tried to map his surroundings, but there was no way to signal for help. Jason, his captor, refused to speak, no matter how Peter tried to reason with him. Neil rushed to the prison to confront Keller, demanding answers. Keller calmly told him to meet outside the yard. Keller confessed he owed the mob $2.5 million and had only 3 hours left before transfer. If Neil didn't deliver the money in time, Peter would die. Neil knew he couldn't handle it alone. He called Diana and told her Peter had been kidnapped. The entire bureau went into crisis mode. Back at headquarters, Neil relayed Keller's demands. But the FBI's first rule stood firm: no negotiation with criminals. The director insisted they'd rescue Peter on their own and punish Keller by sending him straight to the mob's prison. Neil knew Keller too well. He wasn't like him. Keller was ruthless, capable of anything. Still, the bureau refused to bend. That left Neil with one choice: act on his own. Mozzie called Neil, saying he'd received an anonymous call instructing him to relay the time and place for a meeting the next morning. Neil instantly knew it was Keller demanding the $2.5 million ransom. He met Mozzie to prepare the ransom. 4 years earlier, before going to prison, Neil had entrusted Mozzie with his treasure, a stash of art and cash. But the hiding spot was too remote, there wasn't enough time. Neil decided to use his personal stash instead. He tapped the statue in the park. The ring on its finger was a medieval artifact worth a fortune. It had sat in plain sight for 4 years, unnoticed. That ring alone could buy Peter's life. Meanwhile, Peter was still locked in the cage, his hands were bound, so Jason didn't bother standing guard. Peter noticed his shirt still had the dry cleaning tag attached, the one his wife had dropped off that morning. An idea struck, he could use the pin to pick the cuffs. Just then, one of Jason's men came in to report he had passed Neil the message. Peter overheard key details. Keller had bribed the prison transport guards, meaning the breakout would happen during the transfer. Peter realized the truth. Keller never meant to pay the mob, he planned to use the ransom to fund his escape. Jason noticed Peter had caught on, but he didn't care. Peter knew it now, neither Keller nor Jason would ever let him go alive. At the meeting, Jason brought a wooden chess box, demanding Neil place the ring inside. Neil refused, he wanted proof Peter was alive first. Jason reluctantly made the call but allowed Neil only one question. Neil asked Peter to recite the phone number he had used back when Peter first arrested him. Peter instantly realized this was his one chance to send a coded message. He studied the 9-key phone pad and pressed a sequence of numbers before handing the phone back. Neil memorized the digits. As soon as Jason left, Diana emerged from her hiding spot nearby. Neil began decoding. It was the old T9 texting system, each number stood for multiple letters. After several tries, he formed a single phrase, "Don't transfer." Peter was warning them to stop Keller's transfer. Jones, still monitoring the convoy, was baffled. Why stop the transfer? Even without knowing why, they trusted Peter. Jones ordered the driver to turn the transport around. But the driver had already been bought off by Keller. The radio was on speaker mode. Keller heard every word from inside the transport. He gave a subtle signal to the two corrupted guards. Everything happened in seconds. They subdued the others and tossed Keller the keys. Within moments, Keller stripped off his prison jumpsuit, revealing a suit underneath. Jones, confused by radio silence, soon saw the transport turn into a narrow alley. The alley was too tight for pursuit. Keller, ever cunning, locked the corrupted guards inside the truck and disappeared. Realizing Keller was gone, Jones raised the alarm and joined the pursuit. Neil and Diana sped toward the area but got the call. Keller was gone. The bureau director confirmed Keller had bribed 2 guards and the driver. He ordered a citywide manhunt. Meanwhile, Jason's lieutenant returned to report Keller was headed for a private airfield. Jason ordered his men to go ahead. He'd finish off Peter, then follow. Peter, calm as ever, reasoned that Keller wouldn't wait, he'd leave Jason behind. Jason just smirked. He wasn't worried, the ring was still in his possession. However, Keller wouldn't dare cheat the mob, he'd have to wait for Jason to bring him the ring. Peter deliberately provoked Jason, trying to sow distrust between him and Keller. As expected, Jason lost his temper, pulling out his gun to finish Peter off. That was the moment Peter had been waiting for. He had already used the pin to unlock his cuffs. He needed to contact the FBI immediately, but the phone was out of reach. Thinking fast, he detached the arm of a plastic mannequin and used it to drag the phone closer. Finally, Jones got Peter's call. Peter relayed his estimated location and urged the bureau to send backup immediately. Jason could wake up any second. With his gun still nearby, Peter had to unlock the cage fast. Only Neil, the lockpicking prodigy, could guide him through this. Peter described the cage's layout while Neil recreated it with tape and nearby tools. Aside from a soda can, Peter couldn't reach much else. Neil's mind kicked into high gear, instructing Peter to locate the wires leading to the electronic lock. But this type of lock had a failsafe. Cutting the power would permanently seal it. The only way out was to short-circuit the power box and force it open. Peter traced the wires and found the control box. Neil instructed him to use the can's pull tab as a makeshift connector. The final step, break the light bulb, use the filament, and connect it to his phone battery for current. But to do that, Peter had to hang up. Jason began to stir. Peter had no choice but to end the call. Everyone at the bureau held their breath. A minute felt like forever, then the phone rang. "I'm out," Peter said. He had subdued Jason just as the FBI tactical team arrived. But Keller was gone. Even if Jason revealed the airfield, Keller was already long gone. Peter handed the ring to Neil, telling him to take it to the Royal Museum of Scotland. The gesture moved Peter deeply. It symbolized trust between them. When it was all over, Keller called Neil. It was only their second face-off. Neil and Peter realized they'd both been played. It was a draw. Keller said, "Next time we meet, I'll make my move." Then he tossed the phone and vanished. Afterward, Neil nearly gave Peter a heart attack when he kissed his wife Elizabeth right in front of him. Peter's glare could have melted steel, and Neil froze on the spot. It all started when Elizabeth, thanks to Neil's introduction, arranged an art exhibit for a demanding collector named Andrew. Andrew's perfectionism made her job a nightmare. When Andrew left, his assistant Penny apologized to Elizabeth but seemed deeply uneasy. Penny knew Peter was an FBI agent and had something urgent to share. Recently, New York had suffered its third major blackout of the summer due to extreme heat. Peter was melting at home when Elizabeth returned and relayed Penny's message. Turns out Andrew's private power company had been intentionally cutting electricity while claiming shortages to the government. His plan was to stir public outrage, then sell power back to the state at triple the price. If true, it was a serious federal offense. But Penny was terrified of Andrew. She wanted Peter to meet her secretly at the gallery instead. Meanwhile, Sarah, the bounty hunter and insurance investigator, had traveled to Argentina to follow the Nazi dinnerware smuggling case. She discovered that the crime lord Vincent, the same man Peter and Neil once hunted, was the true owner of the artifacts. After his massive financial fraud years ago, Vincent fled to Argentina with hundreds of millions. Once he learned the FBI had seized his shipment, Vincent burned his home and vanished once again. However, Sarah didn't return empty-handed. She tracked down one of Vincent's former servants, who revealed he'd been searching for a German soldier from World War II named Zora. This lead needed Neil's personal touch. With FBI's backing, Neil and Peter arranged to meet Penny as planned. But Peter was stuck in traffic and couldn't make it in time. Meanwhile, Penny grew anxious and frightened, suddenly refusing to testify against her boss, Andrew. Knowing Peter was still 10 minutes away, Neil decided he couldn't wait any longer. He stepped forward, pretending to be Peter, and assured Penny she'd be safe. That calmed her just a little. When Peter found out Neil had impersonated him, he was furious. But with Penny trembling like a scared kitten, Neil had no choice but to keep the act going. Eventually, with Elizabeth's gentle persuasion over the phone, Peter convinced Penny to come to the bureau. Peter instructed everyone that for the next hour, Neil was Agent Burke, and no one was to break character. When Elizabeth escorted Penny upstairs, Neil, still in character, greeted her with a warm hug, making Peter grit his teeth. According to Penny, New York's power grid was deregulated, a free market with little oversight. Her boss, Andrew, acted as a broker between the government and energy providers. By bribing a few executives, Andrew could manipulate supply, staging blackouts to sell power back to the state at triple the price. Penny didn't know much else, but she'd overheard Andrew on the phone looking to hire a master thief. She didn't know what for. Meanwhile, Diana dug into records about the German soldier, Zora. But his file was completely redacted. After the war, Zora supposedly came to America, and his record was sealed by the Department of Defense. 60 years later, if he was still alive, he'd be over 100 years old. Why would Vincent be searching for him? And Andrew's hunt for a thief, well, the best candidate was Neil himself. The twist, Neil was pretending to be Peter, so Peter had to pretend to be Neil. To sell the act, Neil even forged Peter's FBI ID, down to the holographic seal. Meanwhile, Mozzie was building a graphic antenna to decode the music box's signal, hoping to intercept whatever secret frequency it transmitted. Around that time, Peter and Sarah arrived with a rare photo of Zora, the German soldier. The team gathered to study it. Zora had been a radio operator for Germany's U-boat command. The photo was the only image of him known to exist. After Germany's defeat, he was captured by U.S. forces and claimed to have vital intelligence in exchange for leniency. No wonder his records were classified. He was sent to a POW camp on Ellis Island, but weeks later, he escaped and vanished. Peter theorized he'd assumed a new identity, possibly linked to the music box's radio mechanism. With the photo in hand, Peter decided to comb through post-1946 immigration records for any Germans resembling Zora. It was a massive task, but their only lead. As everyone dispersed, Mozzie cornered Peter with another request, something about aliens. Meanwhile, Neil and Sarah noticed someone tailing them. They pretended to be a couple saying goodbye to test the theory. Sure enough, the tail panicked and sped off with his partner. It didn't take a genius, Vincent's men. Neil realized they were all being watched. Meanwhile, Peter's impersonation of Neil had caught Andrew's eye. During their meeting, Andrew decided to test his supposed thief for hire. But Peter had spent enough time with Neil to master his tricks. He easily pointed out flaws in Andrew's security, earning the man's trust. Impressed, Andrew hired Neil to steal a valuable item for him. Back at the bureau, Peter discovered Andrew's firm wasn't the only broker manipulating the city's power grid. Andrew had bribed executives from New York's power companies and several intermediaries to manufacture a fake electricity shortage. However, one intermediary CEO named Francis refused to play along. He secretly recorded his meeting with Andrew. The footage showed Andrew persuading Francis to defraud the government. When Andrew learned about the incriminating video, he turned to the criminal underworld to hire a master thief to steal it back. After the meeting, Neil told the team about being followed the night before, which made Peter even more concerned for everyone's safety. Still, the mission had to go on. Peter, now posing as Neil, needed a crash course in pickpocketing, so Neil found him a teacher. Enter Jack the Everything, a streetwise pro. The first lesson, Peter had to hand Jack $20, only to realize moments later that he'd just been conned out of it. Meanwhile, Neil and Sarah visited the archive room. There were hundreds of German men over 20 who'd become U.S. citizens after 1946, all filed on paper. The search could take days. Back at HQ, Mozzie punished Peter with relentless pickpocket drills. After several tries, Peter started to get the hang of it well enough to steal back his own 20. Soon, it was go time. Peter met Andrew again, discreetly planting a wire inside his jacket pocket. Andrew promised to keep Francis occupied while Neil retrieved the incriminating USB drive. The FBI team listened in from the van. As Andrew entered the house, Peter slipped out of the blue sedan's trunk and made his way to the basement. Following Andrew's directions, he located the hidden access point and picked the lock with ease. Meanwhile, Andrew tried to sweet-talk Francis, boasting that he'd already bribed a senior government energy official. He promised to arrange a private meeting soon. Meanwhile, Peter, guided remotely by Neil, slipped into the bedroom. Neil walked him through every move over comms, turning the heist into a live training session. People hide valuables where they think it's safe, Neil reminded. Sure enough, Peter found the USB exactly where Neil predicted. He copied the data, kept one copy, and returned the original to Andrew to avoid suspicion. Then he slipped out safely. Meanwhile, Andrew continued pitching the scheme, promising hundreds of millions in profits if Francis joined in. But Francis stood his ground and refused. After Peter handed over the USB, Andrew paid him a generous fee. He even offered another job, double the payout, if Peter met him again that weekend. Reviewing the footage, the FBI confirmed it was enough to charge Andrew. However, the identity of the corrupt government official remained unknown. Peter devised a plan to expose him during their next meeting. Jones managed to retrieve Andrew's dry-cleaned shirt. It had a hidden button camera sewn into it. Penny confirmed Andrew would be wearing that very shirt. The plan? Capture the entire meeting between Andrew and the official as undeniable proof. That weekend, Neil, posing as Peter, accompanied Elizabeth to the art gallery. Unaware of Peter's real identity, Andrew enthusiastically introduced Peter to Neil. Every second was captured by the button camera. Just then, Francis arrived, and Andrew quickly pulled Peter aside. He led Peter into a collector's room and told him to greet Francis first. Seeing Peter, Francis assumed he was the corrupt energy official and immediately declared he wanted no part in defrauding the government. With that, he turned to leave. Peter sensed something was wrong, and sure enough, the room's door had been locked tight. Apparently, Andrew had decided to eliminate Francis for refusing to cooperate. Peter realized he'd just stolen evidence for a man planning murder. He immediately ordered Jones to override the electronic lock. Just then, Jones got shocking news: the entire district was about to lose power. Peter put it together instantly. Andrew planned to use the blackout to kill Francis without leaving evidence on surveillance. He told Diana to find Elizabeth, she'd know how to trigger the backup generators. Francis, confused and terrified, listened as Peter revealed his FBI identity and explained Andrew's murderous plan. Peter radioed Neil to tail Andrew closely. Once the lights went out, Peter struggled with the lock while Neil was blocked by the steel gate, losing track of Andrew. Through the hidden button cam, they saw Andrew approaching the room with a gun. Peter told Francis to run and wait for backup. Andrew opened fire at the door, but the darkness gave Peter an advantage. Just then, Elizabeth restored backup power, and Neil stormed in with the FBI team. Peter charged forward and took Andrew down. Only in handcuffs did Andrew realize he'd been under FBI watch the whole time. The mission was over, and Peter and Neil could finally drop their swapped identities. Back at the archives, a power outage hit again, and Mozzie's trusty miner's lamp proved useful. Mozzie found a file matching Zora's height, eye color, and age. Zora had taken the name Michael Christopher Hunter, but he'd been dead for years. The death record listed a niece. Neil froze when he read the name, Alex Hunter, his ex-girlfriend and former partner in crime. At that very moment, Alex had no idea a mysterious figure was watching her from the shadows. Meanwhile, the investigation into Vincent Adler's massive Ponzi scheme deepened. Decoding the music box and cross-referencing records, the team discovered Vincent was searching for a German U-boat, U-869, sunk during World War II. No one knew why. Neil suspected Alex, as Zora's granddaughter, held the key and decided to find her first. Sarah, ever perceptive, sensed there was history between Neil and Alex, which made him a bit uneasy. Meanwhile, Mozzie finally finished building the antenna. It could detect distress signals from the U-boat, but at such a distance, there was no response. Everyone wondered what secrets the submarine held, while Mozzie grew increasingly obsessed with the mystery. Neil tried calling Alex repeatedly, growing worried when she didn't answer. Finally, a chillingly familiar voice answered, Vincent Adler. Vincent revealed he had Alex and would contact Neil soon. Neil realized finding Alex was the only way to reach Vincent. He and Mozzie learned Alex had been a well-known black market broker, last seen dealing with a forger known for his discretion. Neil and Peter devised a sting to get the man talking. Neil approached the forger pretending to do business, showing off a flawless fake Rolex Mozzie had made. The smuggler took the bait, offering to buy a whole crate at $300 apiece. Just then, Peter and the FBI team burst in, claiming to be investigating counterfeit Rolex operations. Neil pretended to defend the man, earning his trust as a supposed fellow criminal. The search turned up nothing. Neil had already swiped the Rolex back. Peter faked outrage, scolding them both before leaving with a secret grin. The man, feeling indebted to Neil, revealed that he'd met with Alex the previous night in the park nearby. Peter immediately told Jones to check the park's surveillance footage. Jones discovered that Alex had entered the park but never left. It was clear she'd been abducted. Peter and Jones split up to search, but soon Peter realized Neil was missing too. He called Neil's phone, and Vincent answered. Neil was being held inside a car parked nearby. Vincent told Peter to lower his gun if he wanted Neil to stay alive. With no choice, Peter climbed into the car, where one of Vincent's men forced him to hand over his weapon. Vincent sat calmly in the passenger seat. He explained that his plan required Neil and Alex. Peter was merely a bonus. Vincent ordered Peter to remove Neil's tracking anklet, then handed them each a drink. Moments after drinking, both passed out. When Neil woke up, Alex was there, worried sick. She thought they'd let themselves get caught to rescue her. Neil half smiled, "You're half right." The truth was, they were all prisoners now. Vincent appeared, grinning, as he opened a steel hatch, revealing a massive German submarine from World War II. The sight left them speechless. Vincent explained that he'd decoded the music box. Its antenna had picked up the submarine's distress signal. He began telling the story. 3 German sailors had commanded this vessel. When Germany surrendered, they hid the sub in remote waters. But something went wrong, and all 3 vanished. One of them, Vincent revealed, was his father. Before they died, they triggered the self-destruct system. Now, Vincent needed Neil, the criminal genius, to disarm it. He handed them tools and watched from behind bulletproof glass. Meanwhile, Sarah grew worried when Neil missed their dinner and went to his apartment. Mozzie, alarmed, Neil was never late, joined her. Back in the sub, Vincent fitted Neil with a camera headset to inspect the interior. Neil crawled through a narrow opening, finding an old printing mechanism wired to blocks of TNT. Outside, Sarah and Mozzie realized they'd lost all contact with Neil and Peter. Worse, Neil's anklet had been removed, and its last signal matched the site of Alex's abduction. It was clear both men had been captured. Inside the submarine, Neil and Peter examined the device's coded lock. The encryption was impossible to crack. They'd have to risk cutting the wires. Neil wasn't a bomb expert, but he knew enough to try. He and Peter worked side by side. The moment they cut the wire, a timer began to beep. The bomb had armed itself. As panic set in, Alex suddenly recalled a fairy tale her grandfather used to tell. Her grandfather, the German radio operator, had once intercepted the sub's distress call. The fairy tale's princess name had been the password all along. Neil typed the name in. Instantly, the countdown stopped and the hatch unlocked. They'd done it. They'd opened the submarine. By now, Peter, Neil, and Alex were all under Vincent's control, while Mozzie arrived with his antenna, hoping to trace the signal. Peter and Neil stepped inside the submarine's hull. Inside the submarine lay treasures, priceless paintings, and antiques, just a fraction of the immense wealth looted by the Nazis. It seemed something had gone wrong during transport, leaving everything behind. The collection was easily worth over $1 billion, and Vincent could hardly contain his excitement. Neil quickly realized, if Vincent had located the submarine through its distress signal, then the transmitter must still be active. He and Peter swiftly removed the device and kept it with them. Moments later, Vincent entered and ordered his men to tie them up and take them back to the truck. Ironically, that played right into Neil's plan. Meanwhile, Mozzie, nervous about being spotted by the police, especially while sitting in the FBI command van, was sweating bullets. Then suddenly, he detected the sub-signal, but strangely, it was moving. The team raced toward the moving beacon. At the same time, Neil, Peter, and Alex were thrown into a massive dock. Two henchmen opened the floodgates, water gushing in fast. In that desperate moment, Neil kept faith Mozzie would come. Mozzie followed the signal, the FBI van speeding through the night. The water reached the floor. Alex told Neil to use the small knife hidden in her bra to cut their ropes. Within moments, they freed themselves and ran upward, only to be met with gunfire. Just then, Mozzie's team arrived, captured the henchmen, and rescued the trio. Neil and Alex, shaken but alive, hugged in relief, unaware Sarah had seen everything. Vincent had escaped with the treasure, and even the captured men had no idea where he'd gone. While imprisoned, Alex had heard a buoy bell near the warehouse. Based on that clue, Peter pinpointed 7 possible sites. He decided the FBI would search each one the next day. After the briefing, Sarah glanced at Alex. The tension between them was palpable. Neil awkwardly approached, and Sarah forced a smile, giving him space to talk. Alex recounted everything, saying she was finally free and would disappear again. She smiled softly, said goodbye, and walked away as Sarah sighed from afar. Seeing Neil caught in the middle, Peter invited both him and Sarah to dinner to ease the tension. Thanks to Elizabeth's warmth, the dinner smoothed things over. The next morning, Peter led the FBI team to search all 7 locations, determined to catch Vincent. Meanwhile, Neil, wandering nearby, spotted a buoy matching Alex's description. As he moved closer, Vincent appeared behind him. This time, Vincent wasn't hostile. Half the treasure, he offered, help me evade the FBI. Neil refused coldly. He couldn't forgive what Vincent had done to Alex. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted. Peter and his team, nearby, rushed toward the blast. The warehouse doors blew open, revealing a raging inferno. A chain of explosions followed, obliterating the billion-dollar treasure. Vincent screamed in agony, trying to rush in, but Neil held him back. In fury, Vincent grabbed a gun, convinced Neil had planted the explosives. He aimed at Neil, but Peter and the FBI stormed in. After 30 episodes of pursuit, Vincent Adler was finally taken down. Peter was relieved Neil was safe, until he noticed a piece of the bomb casing. It was painted with the same design as one of Neil's own artworks. Furious, Peter believed Neil had set the charges himself. Neil tried to explain, but Peter wouldn't listen. The two erupted into a heated argument. Later that night, Neil returned home to find a set of keys and a mysterious address left on his table. When he followed the address, he was stunned. The entire billion-dollar treasure was there, hidden, waiting for him. That's the full summary of White Collar Season 2. Do you want us to make Season 3? If so, leave a comment saying Season 3 below to let us know. If enough people want to see it, we'll definitely continue. Thank you for following us, goodbye, and see you again.